Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Betty looked out of the cab window at the cityscapes running by and smiled. She was on her way home from the airport, her business trip unexpectedly postponed. The chief had called her boss, with whom Betty was already preparing to go through passport control, and informed her that there was no need to fly anywhere today. "Let's go home," Clara, the chief accountant of their company, ordered. "Today we rest. Tomorrow I'll see you at the office." Betty couldn't believe her sudden good fortune. A whole free day and Mason, just at home, took a vacation for a week, and daughter Molly flew with her parents to Miami. Finally, she and her husband would have some alone time. They needed it so badly. After all, lately both of them catastrophically do not have enough time for each other. But before it was different. Compliments, admiring glances, walks, romantic acts, surprises without reason, and talk about everything in the world. When did it change? With the birth of her daughter, or with Betty's going to work after a prolonged maternity leave? The woman couldn't remember the exact moment when Mason began to drift apart. It seemed to have been going on for about 3 years. Betty missed her spouse's jokes, attention, and care. She sincerely missed her formerly loving husband. The mere sight of him made a woman feel loved and attracted. Of course, Betty understood. Mason has a serious job. He often has to fly to Boston, where their company opened a large branch 4 years ago. He practically lives there, sometimes staying for weeks at a time, tired. It's understandable that he doesn't have time for romance. No, Mason honestly fulfilled all the duties of a husband and father, provided their family with everything they needed, spent his free time with his daughter, never gave up household chores. Yet Betty realized it was time for a change. She wanted that warmth back. This free day to spend alone with her husband was just the right thing to do. It would be good for their relationship, as if fate itself were helping them. Betty quietly opened the door with her key. She wanted the effect of surprise, to see her husband's surprised and delighted face. She tiptoed into the hallway. From their bedroom came Mason's quiet voice. He was on the phone, probably being disturbed from work again. He often received calls and texts, even at night, and on weekends or holidays, he could easily be called to the office or to the site. What can you do? He was an important person in a large construction company. But the paycheck was right. Betty was not the kind of wife who threw tantrums at her busy husband, demanding attention. She understood that her husband was trying for the sake of their family, even felt sorry for him, and was grateful to him for this work, and was proud of such a busy and irreplaceable husband. And now the woman did not interfere with Mason, lurked at the front door, and decided to let him finish his conversation and then discover his arrival. But her husband's tone was strange, clearly non-businesslike. Betty involuntarily listened to the words. "Sweetheart, but I'll make a deal. They'll give you a few days of rest, come." Why would I pass up a chance like that? "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I'll buy you tickets, of course, but when else will it happen that my wife will go on a business trip for a week? She rarely goes on business trips, and then there's my daughter at the sea. Jenna, you wanted to see the Capitol. I'll give you a tour." Betty couldn't believe her ears. Is this really happening to her? Her husband is now cooing with some lady and even calling her over to their place while his wife is away on business. Mason has a mistress. Betty really wanted to explain the overheard conversation to herself in a different way, but her imagination was clearly lacking for a different version. And what else could she do to justify all this? Sunshine. "Come here. My wife's on a business trip." Mason almost cooed into the phone, speaking tenderly and affectionately. He hasn't spoken to his wife like that in a long time. Apparently, the unfamiliar Jenna had decided to come to New York after all. That's great. Mason was sincerely happy. I'll meet you at the airport. I have such plans. We'll have a great time. Yeah, whatever you want. Oh, you're so beautiful. I'm looking forward to it too. The conversation seemed to be coming to an end. Betty crept back to the door on shaky legs and slipped out onto the landing. She decided not to show Mason that she had heard him on the phone with someone named Jenna, a beauty by the looks of it. At least that's what he'd called her. Yes, Betty had no doubts about the superior looks of Mason's date. Her husband had always been an aesthete. The woman entered the apartment a second time. Now she purposely slammed the door loudly, signaling her presence. Mason stepped out into the hallway. Betty watched carefully as the confusion, surprise, and disappointment in his eyes was gradually replaced by a made joy. Her husband had always been excellent at self-control. Now he quickly pulled himself together. If Betty had not heard this conversation, she would not have noticed that her arrival was not a happy news for her husband. "You're back," he smiled broadly. Mason was good at hiding his frustration at the lurking plans. "What kind of actor?" "Rescheduled a business trip," Betty replied. Her heart was pounding furiously, and her head was starting to hurt. "Were you upset about it?" Mason asked. "You're just not wearing your face. I felt sick in the cab." Betty lied. "I want to lie down." She went to the bedroom and, without undressing, fell on their big bed, trying not to think about the fact that perhaps her husband was planning to invite his mistress here. How could this be? They had been through so much together, had traveled so long and hard to build their prosperous, happy family, and had overcome all the difficulties together, shoulder to shoulder, always supporting each other, so many small and big victories behind them. Periodically, Betty would learn that the husband of one of her colleagues or friends had a mistress. Outraged and certain that it would definitely never happen in her family. And now this conversation. Her head ached, growing increasingly nauseous. Mason, seeing his wife lying pale and in a state of flux, was alarmed and brought her painkillers and a cold compress to her forehead. Had it not been for the overheard conversation, Betty would now be glad of such care. But then she wouldn't have been sick, either, because she'd been overexcited and her blood pressure had skyrocketed. Pressing her fingers to her temples so that the headache was easier to bear, Betty thought back to her and Mason's acquaintance. It had been a fun, carefree college time. The girl was relaxing in a club, in the company of classmates. There she had been noticed by him, a charming fellow with a wide, white-toothed smile, witty and cheerful, who could dance, unlike Betty herself. "What a handsome boy," Kelly remarked, a childhood friend. "Lucky you, don't miss out." And Betty? Yes, Mason was a prince, but right now she just wanted to have fun with her friends. She had no plans for romance, much less a serious relationship. Only recently Betty had hardly got rid of her ex-boyfriend, obsessive and constantly demanding attention. And now the girl was enjoying her freedom. The admiration in Mason's eyes was pleasing to Betty's ego. She liked his compliments and touches. He obviously hoped to continue communication outside the club, even took Betty's phone number. However, she had changed some numbers on purpose, as she often did. The girl did not plan a second meeting, so she tried to enjoy communication with a handsome guy here and now. And then their student company decided to go to another club, closer to the house where Betty lived. The girl said goodbye to her new acquaintance, who was upset by this news. Mason then gently took her narrow palm in his, kissed her hand gallantly, and said, "I'll call you back. I really liked you. You're so beautiful, so special. I won't let you go." Betty smiled. She felt like a real princess at that moment. The girl was always popular with the opposite sex. She had what is called a model appearance. Tall, slender, long-legged, her shiny brown hair falling below her shoulders, and emerald green eyes, regularly received admiring glances and compliments, and each time it was very gratifying. As she did now, Betty smiled sweetly at Mason, whom she thought she would never meet again. And she got into the overcrowded car of her classmates, where her friends were already waiting for her. The merry company drove through the night streets of her hometown for a long time. The students laughed, sang their favorite songs, made plans for the approaching summer, and Betty, to her surprise, couldn't stop thinking about Mason. It wasn't the first time she'd given a guy the wrong phone number, only now she regretted it for some reason. And she felt guilty about lying to her new acquaintance. The first person Betty saw when they pulled up to the club was Mason. It turned out he had taken a cab and followed their car and was now walking toward her smiling and open arms. The girl hurried toward the guy with joy and relief. How lucky was it that he had guessed to do this? She was afraid they would never meet again. With Mason, Betty had always been fun. He knew exactly how to cheer her up and make her laugh. Next to him, she felt safe from everything in the world and very loved. She realized that if she needed him, Mason would do everything possible and impossible for her. And it was very pleasant. And Mason had somehow gained authority among Betty's friends, which was very important to her. And this could not but make the girl proud of her for such a witty and communicative young man. He, like Betty, was a student, a third-year student, but he was studying at another university, an architectural and construction university, and was already working part-time for a friend of his father's. Betty, on the other hand, was fully immersed in her studies. Her parents offered her to enter the University of Economics to study accounting. The girl didn't mind. By the end of the 11th grade, she had no special preferences. An accountant, so an accountant. Vacancies will not be difficult to find later. Accountants are required everywhere. But Mason really loved everything about architecture and could talk about his work for hours. Betty loved to listen to his stories and look into the enthusiastic eyes of her favorite person. She had no doubt Mason would be a great success in life. In their 4th year, the couple decided to consummate their relationship. They were sure of their feelings for each other. "I've found my destiny. It's you," said Mason one day. "I want to be with you all the time, not date you a few times a week. I want to fall asleep and wake up next to you. So what if we're still students? I don't want to wait too long to get married." Betty was happy, smiling. She felt the same way. The prospect of becoming Mason's wife and always being by his side was breathtaking. But parents on both sides actively opposed the ideas of the young ones, motivated by quite logical facts. Both are still studying, on their feet did not become, there is nowhere to live. Where to hurry? Meet and get married later, when you've finished your studies and found a job. And then Betty thought of telling her parents that she was expecting a child. So her mom and dad and her future mother-in-law quickly organized a wedding. "That's a lie, of course," said Mason. "But what can you do if they need a good reason?" "It's their own fault," agreed Betty. "Well, what if it's true? What if we really have a baby?" Mason suggested, "I really want us to have a baby. I'm already working. We'll live in my grandmother's empty apartment. I'll finish university. I'll be made the head of the department at once. The chief has already promised me a place, so I'll feed us." "That's a great idea." Betty was happy. She suddenly realized that she really wanted a child from the man she loved. It would be the happiest and most beautiful baby in the world. But for some reason the attempts of the young ones were not successful. the cherished pregnancy did not come. True, then this young married couple did not particularly care, and without that in life was a lot of interesting parties, friends, studies, traveling. When the newlyweds admitted to their parents that there was no child, they didn't even get angry. By that time, adults sincerely loved the second halves of their children and considered their decision to get married a correct and responsible step. They only laughed at the ingenuity of Betty and Mason and hoped that they would not delay their grandchildren. And then, finally, the diploma. Betty and her husband are now young professionals. Mason, as promised, was promoted to department head. Betty got a job as a bookkeeper at the mall. Now they were making their own money for a living. Not much, of course, yet, but their parents continued to help out as a matter of habit. So they had enough not only for food and utilities, but also for fun. "How good you are!" Callie, Betty's friend, admired her. "You've done so well in life." "I don't believe in fairy tales about early marriages falling apart, but I've been dumped by a guy again, and all I get are assholes." Betty sincerely pitied the woman who had failed in her personal life and thanked fate for sending her such a faithful, loving, reliable man as Mason. Her friends and coworkers were constantly complaining about their boyfriends and husbands. During these conversations, Betty felt a little awkward. She couldn't keep the conversation going, for she had nothing to reproach Mason with. Time passed. The newlyweds gradually managed to establish a household. Mason and Betty were homeschooled children, cared for by their parents, so household chores were a challenge for both of them at first. It turned out that Betty's long hair quickly clogs the drain, dishes do not wash themselves, dust in the corners accumulates incredibly quickly, and regularly ordered food in the restaurant hurts the family budget. The newlyweds were in for many such surprises. It got to the point that Betty, going to prepare dinner, typed in a search engine phrase, "Where can I get red water for borscht?" The couple withstood the test of everyday life with dignity. Both quickly enough learned to cook and clean, and even made repairs independently in the apartment. Their marriage was waiting for another test of durability. They were married for 5 years, and the family still had no children. Even Kelly managed to give birth to a son. However, she raised her Ethan alone now. His father considered himself too young for such responsibility and disappeared in an unknown direction. But Betty was still almost envious of her friend, looking at her miracle, a tiny cute little baby boy, and desperately dreamed of her own baby. Mason, too, was eager to be a father. The hospitalizations began. Betty was diagnosed with serious reproductive problems. Medications, ultrasounds, tests, treatments. All this exhausts both mentally and physically, but for the sake of her dream, the girl did not give up. Mason was by her side and supported her spouse in everything. Probably, this is our punishment for lying to our parents then, as if we were expecting a child. Betty sighed sorrowfully, looking at another negative pregnancy test. "Come on, we meant well, and we didn't do anything wrong. And don't get upset, everything will work out." But it didn't. When all possible treatments had been tried, the doctor recommended echo. Betty and Mason were sure they would soon be parents. But 3 tries and no success. Betty lay on the bed and just stared at the ceiling. There was no more strength left to cry. She realized she was never going to be a mother. It was all useless, and she didn't want to torture her own body, to hope again and then be disappointed. And then Mason came up. "Shall we try again?" He said. "Only once. I read the forums. Some people only get it on the 8th, 9th try. We're on our 4th. Let's do it. 4th try, and that's it. If we fail again, we'll take a kid from the orphanage. Do you agree?" Betty jumped up on the bed. She once suggested her husband to look at orphan profiles, but he flatly refused. He wanted a child of his own blood. He didn't want to raise a stranger's son or daughter, but Betty didn't care. She dreamed of giving love and warmth to a tiny, defenseless human being, even if not born by her. This desire overshadowed all others, filled the woman's thoughts. Mason remained adamant. He argued about bad genetics, the difficulties of adaptation. He didn't want another man's child, and he had every right to. Betty accepted his opinion. So her husband offers to take the baby from the orphanage, but before that he asks for another chance at a native heir. Of course, this time Betty happily agreed to the echo. She was going to the procedure in a completely different mood. One way or another, soon her cherished dream will come true. She will become a mother. It is not known what played a major role, the new therapy or Betty's positive attitude. But it wasn't until this fourth time that everything worked out. Betty looked at the 2-strike test and cried with happiness. And soon Mason joined her. The pregnancy was difficult. Betty was often hospitalized. Mason completely took over the household and almost blew the dust off his wife. He honored her every request, anticipated her every wish, even asked her to quit her job. You don't need to go there now. Nerves unnecessary waste. Rest better, have a baby, grow up a little, and find you a new job. My salary is enough for everything, and next year I'll be promoted. Betty happily plunged into the life of a housewife. A beloved, loving husband, a cozy new apartment, and soon there will be a baby. What more do you need to be happy? Oh, Betty, you are a clever woman. You have organized your life so well. My friend Kelly, who often came to visit, said approvingly. Not like me, a single mother who is torn between work and my son. Ethan was already in 1st grade. Kelly did look tired, thin, anxious, always in a hurry. There's a reason I told you at the club. Don't let him get away. He's a great guy. Remember what I said? I do. Betty agreed. She texted Mason the wrong phone number that night, and if he hadn't followed them to the club, none of this would be happening now. It's scary to imagine. And then Molly was born. There was no limit to the happiness of the young parents and the newfound grandparents. Now their family became even stronger and happier. True, Betty, after a long treatment, difficult pregnancy, and childbirth, began to have problems with blood pressure. She often felt ill. Mason in these moments perfectly coped with the baby, bathed his daughter, fed her from a bottle, entertained the baby, even swaddled the newborn. And he was just as good at it as Betty. Molly grew up bright and active, but very sickly. She often caught colds and bronchitis in the garden, so Betty had to delay going to work. The maternity leave dragged on until her daughter was 5, and then Kelly invited her best friend to her firm. There was just a vacancy, so the women became colleagues. Life fell into place. Molly was already a 1st grader. Betty worked. Mason became the head of a large branch of his company, which was located in Boston. There were no money problems. Her husband provided for the family. Betty thought their relationship was perfect. Yes, there wasn't much romance anymore. Sometimes it was very lacking. But after all, they had been together for so many years, it was normal. The main thing was trust, reliability, mutual support. And now this conversation. Betty felt like she couldn't handle the pressure. It seemed to her that these health problems were in the past. Then after giving birth, Mason found the best doctors for her. The new mom got the right therapy, and she forgot about the headaches for years. But now such stress and they're back. By evening, Mason couldn't take it anymore and called his wife an ambulance. She was diagnosed with hypertension and taken to the hospital. She had to lie down for about a week. During that time, the woman pulled herself together. She has no right to beat herself up like that. She has a small daughter and a beloved husband. Yes, he made a mistake, but Betty doesn't know the situation. Maybe it's Jenna, the unknown Jenna, who has tricked him around. Betty is not going to give up just like that. She's been building her strong, happy family for a long time. She and Mason have done everything possible and impossible together. And now she's gonna give her husband to some skank? No way! That's the last thing we need. Molly needs a father. She needs a reliable, caring husband. Betty will fight for her family. This decision gave the woman strength and vigor. There was plenty of time at the hospital to get busy searching for the beautiful stranger. Betty only knew her name so far, but in the age of social media, that was enough. First of all, the woman set about monitoring her husband's accounts. Mason had a lot of friends and subscribers, colleagues, friends, partners, just acquaintances. Jenna among them was enough. Betty rejected ladies of age immediately. Then it was the turn of women who did not reach the aesthetic tastes of her husband. Mason always preferred beautiful, slender, well-groomed girls like Betty herself. The remaining Jenna beauties from her husband's pages were 3. These young women didn't look too suspicious, all of them showing off their own happy families on social media. Their profiles were littered with photos of their other halves. Who knows who they are, though? It's not a fact that Mason's mistress is single. How many cases when married ladies decide to have a little fun and make a friend on the side? And yet Betty's intuition told her that Jenna wasn't one of them. Suddenly, the search engine gave Betty several accounts with a note. Perhaps you two know each other. Among them was Liam, a colleague of Mason's from the Boston branch. In the main profile photo, he was clearly posing from a corporate event, with their company logo in the background. Betty was interested. Her husband had never shown her pictures from the parties he'd flown to Boston for. He said he wasn't interested in collecting that garbage, and he hated being photographed. And now Betty wanted to see how their corporate holidays were going. If Liam had put a photo from the party on the cover, he'd probably have a couple more on his profile. Betty went to the page of her husband's colleague, and as she expected, he had a whole album of photos from corporate parties. The woman started flipping through the photos with interest. She noticed her husband in some of them. He seemed to be deliberately hiding from the cameras, and the photographer managed to capture only a glimpse of him, in a half-turn or from the back. Betty smiled. Mason hadn't liked to be photographed since he was a child. His mother had told me a funny story about it, but it wasn't long before the woman wasn't laughing. The next photo featured the 3 of them, Liam, Mason, and a beautiful, bright young woman with chiseled facial features. Betty's husband stood in the center. The lady was clinging to him in an overly possessive way, and he was naturally and habitually putting his arm around her slim waist. Something wasn't right here. Betty shifted her eyes downward. Each of the characters in the photos were labeled Mason and Jenna. Jenna. Betty seemed to have accidentally stumbled upon the one she was looking for. The woman quickly navigated to the girl's page. There were many pictures of her. The beauty clearly loved being photographed. You bet, with such appearance, just a supermodel. Jenna at a resort. Jenna in a luxurious restaurant. Jenna in the pool, and everywhere alone. How could a hottie like Jenna be alone? She can't be. I bet she's got a lot of dates. And suddenly Betty saw a picture from the sea. It was obviously some foreign resort. White sand, bright sunshine, palm trees, turquoise waves. Jenna was photographing the beautiful landscape. In the frame, apparently, accidentally got a man. He stood with his back to the lens. But Betty recognized her husband. his figure, the birthmark on his neck, and the t-shirt that she herself gave him. There was no doubt. This was the same Jenna, her husband, had called to New York for her business trip. The same mistress. And they're serious. They're even traveling to the sea together. Mason must have explained those trips to her as business trips, of which he'd had too many lately. Well, at least now Betty knows the enemy. Jenna was in her final year of university when she met Mason. It happened in a bar where she and a classmate were celebrating the end of the session. A handsome young man in an expensive business suit was relaxing at a neighboring table with a few friends, or rather colleagues. Those two were dressed in strict jackets and pants. Businessmen, probably. Christina, Jenna's dorm roommate and classmate, looked at them. They're all so cool. Come on, they're old for us, and they're probably married. Just let me dream. So cool, well-groomed, not like our guys, continued to admire Christina. Having a couple of glasses of wine, she always became kinder to the opposite sex. Every man seemed to her almost a prince on a white horse. But the men in this nearby company did look attractive. Stylish, trim, handsome. One of them stood out in particular, gray-eyed, with a wide, white-toothed smile that made dimples appear on his cheeks. Jenna tried not to look in his direction. "Look, they're looking at us," Christina said admiringly. "Of course, you yourself do not take your eyes off them. So they look at you and are surprised. Calm down. Jenna, they are coming to us." Indeed, soon one of the men, not the one Jenna liked, came to their table. He introduced himself as Liam and asked Christina to dance with him. She gladly agreed. Jenna finished her cocktail and watched the dancing of her friend, who, apparently, decided to get closer to the beau by all means. But another man, the oldest of the group, with an expensive watch on his arm and stylish glasses, separated from the table. "Good evening." He introduced himself, taking a seat next to Jenna. "What is it that such a beautiful girl is sad here alone?" What a banal approach. From the representative of the older generation, Jenna expected something original. "I'm not sad about being alone. I'm enjoying it." The girl not too subtly hinted at being left alone, but the newfound admirer did not give up. "My name is James," he introduced himself. "I just can't resist your beauty. You look like a young Nicole Kidman. Has anyone ever told you that?" "More than once." "Can I ask you your name?" "No, you don't have to say no so flatly. You just don't realize you're missing out on a great opportunity I could give you. Give me some peace for starters." Jenna was getting annoyed. That Christina, she is there on the dance floor with her handsome man, and she has to fight off an obsessive suitor who does not understand neither hints nor direct refusals. James, meanwhile, had moved closer to Jenna, and he was drunk. That partly explained his lack of judgment. Surely in ordinary life, this man is tactful and intelligent. Some people shouldn't drink at all. They turn into such animals. James put his hand on the back of Jenna's chair and looked at the girl with admiring eyes. It was unpleasant. She stood up, intending to leave, but the man held her hand, his palm firmly around her wrist. "Where are you going? We haven't even met yet." "I have to go. I'll walk you out." James jumped up from his seat. He never let go of my hand. "Let me go already." Jenna shouted loudly. He didn't think to loosen his grip. Perhaps he couldn't hear or understand what he was saying, the cocktails playing no small part in his behavior. James, instead of letting go of Jenna, suddenly hugged her. It was too much. The girl moved as hard as she could at the insolent man, her elbow right into his soft belly, and he awed and opened his arms for a moment. The man's eyes flashed with malice. It frightened the girl. anything could be expected from a drunken stranger. She tried to slip away, but he grabbed her again. This time roughly and very tightly. Jenna felt pain. "We need to talk. Sit down," James asked. "James, what are you doing?" "Calm down." The gray-eyed man approached them. Fortunately, he noticed what was going on at the table and rushed to help, either to rescue his friend from possible trouble or to protect the girl. For some reason, Jenna immediately felt safe and realized that everything was going to work out. Why would she? James' speech became more and more incoherent. Two other men from the company came up to them and took the clueless comrade to their table. "You excuse him." The gray-eyed one smiled. "I had a little too much to drink, and today the deal was closed, so here's a note." "Thank you," replied Jenna. She couldn't take her eyes off the man's beautiful, intelligent eyes. The girl just drowned in them. He looked even more attractive up close than he looked from afar. For some reason, she wanted to run her hand over his cheeks, touched with light stubble. That had never happened to her before. Jenna painfully invented an excuse to prolong communication with the gray-eyed man. She did not want to part with him. Fate had taken pity on her, and everything had worked itself out. And Mason, Liam and Christina, who had been dancing, came to the table. "Come on, land here. Look how cool the girls are." Christina laughed foolishly with adoration, looking at her beau. Mason stayed at the table, and Jenna realized it was because of her. A hot wave ran through her whole body. She was drawn to Mason more and more, like a magnet pulling her. Mason was a very interesting and witty conversationalist. He seemed to be able to hold a conversation on any topic, and Jenna wanted to agree with his opinions every time. She wished the evening would never end. It was unlikely that she would ever meet this man who had such a strange influence on her again. From the table conversations, the girl realized that he lives and works in Boston and came here on a business trip. Mason, to Jenna's disappointment, did not even try to get her phone number. Most likely he is married, and he does not need a relationship on the side. Yes, the girl felt that she liked Mason, and it was very pleasant, but he behaved as restrained as possible, not showing his sympathy in any way. Jenna hoped that she did not give away her sudden feelings either. Until now, she hadn't understood what passion, love, and other concepts from romantic books and movies meant. It seemed to her that all of these were fictitious categories, that they didn't really exist. But now she was in a whirlpool of feelings, and she had no idea what to do with it all. The evening was rapidly drawing to a close. The bar closes at 200 hours. Christina and Liam decided to take a cab and go for a walk. They called Masana and Jenna, but the man refused at once, saying that he had an important meeting in the afternoon. Jenna thought of some reason not to go with the couple. When Christina and Liam drove off into the night, Mason offered to walk Jenna home. Her heart raced. Was what had been dreamed of all evening really happening? She'd really hit it off, and they'd start a relationship. Without witnesses, he would finally dare to take a step towards her. His heart fluttered in joyful anticipation. In the cab, the girl waited for Mason to kiss her, or at least to embrace her, but he again behaved a little aloofly, though he joked and smiled a lot. And already on the porch of the student dormitory, he took Jenna's phone number. She gladly dictated the numbers to him and realized that from that moment, she would live in anticipation of a call. It didn't take long to wait. Mason called the very next day, invited to the movie. After the movie, they walked along the waterfront, then stopped by a luxurious restaurant. Jenna had been living in Boston for 5 years, but she had no idea that there were such places here. She felt a little uncomfortable, but Mason helped her relax, just covered her hand with his palm and all the anxiety, worry, awkwardness disappeared as if it had never happened. Then he offered to go to his place. Of course, Jenna knew what that meant, and Mason realized that she knew what she was getting into, so he didn't insist, gave her the right to choose. Jenna agreed without the slightest hesitation. The corporate apartment was as upscale and presentable as Mason himself, stylish, bright, spacious, modern, and clearly designed by a designer. Jenna didn't realize whether the company had bought the apartment for Mason or whether it was just renting it to an employee, because the latter was often in Boston. That's how they started dating. That first night, the couple was cozy on the couch in the living room. Mason suggested Jenna not to go to the hostel at night, but to stay with him. The girl gladly accepted the invitation. She did not want to part with Mason. And here they were watching some show on TV and eating rolls ordered from the restaurant, drinking insanely delicious champagne. Finally, the girl decided on an important question, which did not give her a rest. "And you, were you married?" she asked. "Yes, does it matter?" Jenna thought for a moment. On the one hand, it really didn't matter. She feels happy around Mason. She wants to see the face and smell the smell of the man she loves, to feel his touch and bathe in his admiration and care, and to be a part of his beautiful life. Yes, Jenna wasn't lying to herself. She liked that Mason was so successful and wealthy, but that wasn't the only thing that attracted her to him. Far from it. And the wife, she was somewhere far away, New York. What did it matter if she even existed or not? On the other hand, Jenna realized that it is not good to have an affair with a married man. It is always a betrayal, and the outcome is often sad, even tragic sometimes. The girl herself many times lectured her friend Christina when she was too fond of unfree men. And yet, still Mason attracted Jenna, charmed, mesmerized. For the sake of being near him, she was ready to go over all her principles and moral turmoil. After all, Jenna is not going to take him out of the family, at least not until she is enough to feel, at least sometimes as a woman, this strong, confident, and intelligent man. Mason has shown Jenna a very different life. The girl came to Boston to study from the village, and it took a long time to get used to the city. There was a time when she was even shy to go with her classmates to cheap cafes and eateries. In her village, she did not see anything like that. Such places seemed to her too luxurious. She felt in them some lost and ridiculous. Gradually, Jenna settled in Boston. It was easier and more fun to adapt with her roommate, Christina, a country girl like her. Looking at other students and following their advice, Jenna learned to dress and make up so as to favorably emphasize the advantages of her appearance. And movie halls, cafes, and bars soon stopped scaring her. Boys, students, and even teachers began to pay attention to Jenna. The girl realized the power of her beauty, but was not in a hurry to use it to the fullest, not like Christina, who seemed to try to take from her freshness and youth all at once. Jenna, however, having seen different stories in her village and in the city too, had made up her mind. First she would study, get on her feet, and then she would organize her personal life, surely with a worthy and successful man. They will have a wonderful family, a perfect one. Jenna will never again live in the poverty of her childhood, and she will not return to her village. On the contrary, she will bring her mother and brother here. The girl had global plans, and she confidently went to the goal. She studied at her pedagogical university, but she did not plan to work as a teacher of biology and geography. She thought that after graduation, she would find something more prestigious and highly paid. Entering this department right after school, the girl did not think much about the prospects. She went to the place where she had enough points, and the competition was small. and now Mason appeared in her life, and with him, trips to restaurants, luxurious gifts, long conversations on interesting topics, vivid impressions, new acquaintances. Not even 2 months after the beginning of their relationship, as Mason offered Jenna to fly with him for a few days to Thailand, the girl with pleasure plunged into this beautiful sea fairy tale. Later, such trips became quite frequent. Mason could easily explain his absence to the family by business trips and business trips. Jenna, on the other hand, tried not to think about the fact that her man had another life, a wife and a daughter in New York. Of course, she almost immediately looked through her lover's social networks and saw pictures of his wife. Beautiful, successful woman, quite harmoniously looked in a pair with imposing Mason. Together they looked just perfect. Jenna could not help but recognize this fact, although it hurt her. The girl didn't plan to fall in love with Mason, or anyone at all. She had other goals for now, but she couldn't help it. Even yesterday, Jenna was an ordinary student who often had to eat instant noodles for dinner, even with Christina sometimes sharing this treat. She counted a small scholarship and saved on everything, and today she knew by sight the staff of the most elite establishments in Boston. She herself now lived in the very Mason corporate apartment that had so delighted her in a stylish studio, packed to the brim with tricked-out appliances, with a spacious bathtub. Jenna liked to lie in it with a flute of cold champagne, like the girls in the movies about the beautiful life. Mason flew to Boston every month, sometimes more than once. It was required by work issues, but Jenna suspected that his business trips became so frequent because of her too. The girl realized that Mason really took her very seriously, not as just another mistress. And he wasn't the type to change women like a glove. Jenna knew that this was Mason's first and only relationship on the side, and she could see that the man was very uncomfortable with the fact that he had to lie to his wife, but he couldn't give up on Jenna. When the girl graduated from the university, Mason got her a job in his branch in the Human Resources Department. Jenna had to learn a lot practically from scratch to master a new specialty, but she coped, and she liked the work very much. And the salary, almost every month coming with a solid bonus, and quite happy. The girl realized that without experience, right from the university bench, she would never have found a place with such a salary if not for Mason, and she was grateful to him for the opportunity to get on her feet. It was very important to her. Time passed in the company. Some of the employees, of course, began to speculate about the relationship between the branch manager and Jenna. They talked and got used to it. The girl cared little about it, but she realized that sooner or later some well-wisher would report everything to Mason's wife. And what would happen then? It was difficult to suppose, yet years passed, but everything remained the same. Perhaps the 1,000 miles separating New York and Betty was released from the hospital. She was now completely well, both physically and mentally. She realized that she would fight for the man she loved and for her family. This decision gave her strength and confidence, but Betty needed allies, no one but her faithful friend Kelly to tell her the details of the story. "What a mess," Kelly said thoughtfully after listening to Betty. The women were sitting in a coffee shop, not far from the office. It was the only place to get away from the ears of their co-workers. "Yes, these are pies. I never would have thought that about Mason, the perfect husband and father from the outside. The weird thing is, he's a really great husband and father. They've been together for 4 years, and I had no idea. With his schedule, it's no wonder, constantly on the road, it's easy to hide not just a mistress, but a second family. Well, what have you decided? How will you proceed?" "Fight for my husband," Betty replied confidently. "I want Mason to realize that I am worth more to him than he is, and that no young beauty is worth losing his family. I'd like to do it without Mason realizing that I know about his relationship. So you don't have a specific plan? Kelly clarified. What kind of plan? I don't have a lot of information. I only know her name and that she works at the Boston branch, which is probably where Mason put her. But I've seen pictures of her, and she's very pretty. So we need more information. Kelly concluded. Betty really liked it, us. She realized she now had a solid support in the person of her best friend. We do. Betty agreed, but where would she get that information? I don't know any of Mason's colleagues in Boston. I can't even ask them. I have an idea. Kelly suddenly had an idea. Really, what is it? Wait, I don't want to get your hopes up yet. I'll call you tonight. And her friend kept her promise. Indeed, called in the evening and outlined her simple, like all things brilliant plan. Kelly's brother had a friend who was an IT specialist. He helped Betty install a program that she could now use to control her husband's social networking and messenger accounts. If you don't know me, I don't know you. Half jokingly, half seriously, the young man warned. Betty could now see all of her husband's correspondence with family and friends, co-workers, partners, but most importantly with her, with the young blue-eyed Jenna who had intruded into their family. Of course, the woman felt some remorse because she had so treacherously invaded the personal space of the man she loved. But on the other hand, he had done far worse to her. Betty quickly realizes that things between Jenna and Mason are quite serious. She lives in his corporate apartment, cooking him delicious dinners there when Mason flies to Boston on business. Apparently, she tries very hard, specifically looking for exquisite recipes, not like Betty herself. Work and a child takes so much energy and time, so she has recently had enough only for pasta and sausages, and the apartment is often not cleaned. However, Mason has never once expressed dissatisfaction with the domestic moments. On the contrary, when time allowed him, he took care of household chores without any indulgence, but maybe he still lacked care and attention, Betty. With the arrival of the long-awaited child, the woman did indeed spend much less time with her husband. Perhaps what happened was her fault. No, that's the wrong way to think about it. It's not easy for her either. But it's not like she went looking for a comforting lover. Mason and Jenna occasionally flew together for vacations. Betty realized this from the correspondence, in which there were phrases like "when we were in Italy" or "resorts by the warm sea, we've been many times before. I want to try something new. Maybe the Scandinavian countries? Sounds like they've traveled halfway around the world. That was a shame." Betty was sympathetic to her husband's busy schedule. Yes, they didn't spend much time together, but the woman believed that her husband was working for the good of their family. And now it turned out that many of these business trips were just a cover for traveling with Jenna. Reading the correspondence, Betty realized a lot. This girl is really in love with Mason, and him, Jenna gives him what her husband cannot get in the family. Passion, free time, vivid emotions, blind adoration. But if he was really ready to leave his wife for her, he would have done it already. Mason is clearly serious about Jenna, but apparently doesn't really love her. Except things can change. For example, the young mistress will give him a child, and then Mason will never leave them. Or anything else for that matter. Slowly Jenna can bind her man to herself, make him fall in love with himself. So she had to act decisively and as quickly as possible, but she couldn't come up with a plan. And Kelly couldn't offer any advice. "I'm a single mom. What kind of counselor am I?" she said, confused. "Just know that if you need my help, I'm always here for you." "Thank you. You've been so helpful." At least now I know the ins and outs of their relationship. What's it like? How does it feel to know your husband's not going on a business trip? But to her, it hurts, Betty admitted. But it's still better than being in the dark. Jenna had been thinking about starting her own business for a long time. She decided to try to open several dispensing centers of a popular online store. The girl thoroughly studied all the necessary information and made a business plan, but the accumulated funds were clearly not enough to start. Jenna was sure that Mason would gladly help her. He always supported all her endeavors and encouraged her development in any sphere. This time, too, Mason was pleased with the idea of a mistress. That's a wonderful idea. He praised it. And the direction is promising. With paperwork, if anything, I'll help. Only I do not have enough money. And Jenna voiced the missing amount, quite decent, but not astronomical for Mason. I can't take out so much at once. I'll fly to New York. You remind me, I'll transfer it. As it was agreed, Jenna sent Mason a text message with a reminder about the money transfer. Her lover never refused her anything. The girl was used to it, so she had no doubt that now she would get what she wanted. But the message about crediting the funds did not come, and time was running out. It was necessary to pay rent, advertising, utilities, and purchase racks for storage. So Jenna texted Mason again, to which she received a reply that he was looking into the matter. Eventually, Mason called and informed her in a frustrated voice that it wasn't going to work out. His family urgently needed money for something. Jenna did not get into the details. The man promised that he would definitely help her next month. The girl leaned back in her chair. Now she clearly felt second best. The family needed money, and Mason had chosen his wife in this situation, easily and without the slightest doubt. Next to him, Jenna was used to feeling superior to everyone else. Perhaps she was even in love with this self-perception, but now the girl fully saw the disadvantages of her status. She is only a mistress, not even entitled to take offense. Mason does so much for her as it is. Betty, of course, read a text message from Jenna in which the mistress reminded Mason that he promised to give her money for business development. That message both pleased and angered the woman. At the same time pleased by the fact that the girl apparently takes good advantage of her husband's opportunities. Mason cannot ignore this. He is far from being a fool. The easier it will be to convince him of the mercantile interest of the mistress, which against the background of sincere love and affection of his wife, will look especially ugly. And Betty was outraged that Jenna is too bossy with her husband's resources, and he, apparently, easily follows her lead. No way, Jenna. You're out of the family budget. That evening, Mason was late for work, and Betty had time to prepare a delicious dinner. Sitting at the table, her husband marveled at her culinary skills and praised the dishes. Better than a restaurant, husband confessed. I'm glad you like it, smiled Betty. How was your day? The usual. It was fine. I've just had my infinity breakdown, Betty confessed. Infinity? Mason was surprised. I just bought you a car a while ago. It's a good, reliable car. I'll send the mechanics over tomorrow. No need. I already took it to the service myself. It needs repair. Expensive. How much? And then Betty said an amount only a little less than what the mistress had asked. Mason stopped talking, thinking. Betty realized he was considering whether he could help both his wife and Jenna at the same time, and deciding who to sponsor first. A lot depended on his choice now, and his wife helped him make it. I need a car urgently. Molly has a competition soon, training every day. I can't miss it, and I have to travel a lot for work every day. You know we have locations all over the city. Mason immediately transferred the necessary amount of money to Betty at the table. And then a little later the woman read a message from her husband, in which he justified himself to Jenna. The mistress never received the promised funds. What pleased Betty most was the fact that Mason had chosen her over Jenna. After all, the mistress also had a good enough reason. She wanted to start her own business, and yet her husband had helped his wife. Jenna must have noticed that, and now she's suffering. Serves her right. Let her know her place. The money situation upset Jenna and even disappointed her, but she pulled herself together and life went on as usual. The following month Mason did find the missing funds for her, and the girl started her business. She had a wise assistant and mentor in the person of her favorite man, so the experience was successful. Soon the invested money began to bring a good income. True, Jenna had more worries, but she even liked such business. She had no time and energy to think about her unenviable position as a mistress. She simply enjoyed Mason's presence in her life, his attention, his support, his patronage. She was still fascinated by his gray eyes, and she still melted at his touch as surely as she had on the first day of their acquaintance. Christmas was approaching, her favorite holiday since childhood. Jenna loved the scent of pine needles. She was mesmerized by the colorful lights, garlands. She was no longer a little girl, but as before, she associated the end of December with the expectation of a miracle, and this time the miracle really happened. Mason sent a text message asking her to buy a beautiful new swimsuit instead of an evening gown for the corporate party. He suggested we fly together to the Arab Emirates on New Year's Eve weekend. Getting away for a few days from the hustle and bustle that always accompanies the end of the year sounded delightful. Of course, Jenna replied that she gladly accepted the offer and went to the mall that same day. She wanted to look flawless for Mason on this vacation. Jenna liked to see his rapturous gaze, to hear the compliments she received. So she picked up a beach closet, maximally emphasizing the numerous advantages of her appearance. The girl was sure that not only Mason will admire her on the beach, let her lover see what success his girl enjoys with others. Jenna had read somewhere that it greatly increases the value of the chosen one in the eyes of men. The girl was already anticipating how they would splash in the warm waters of the Persian Gulf and rock out at the local discos, and then rest in the luxurious apartments of the hotel. The trip promised to be wonderful. Jenna tried to behave with restraint, but in the end she could not resist a handsome student from England. He was 3 years younger than her and seemed to have a real crush on the American girl. Although Jenna immediately told him that their romance was purely resort for only a few days. The young man made her feel needed and admirable again, but Jenna realized that neither he nor anyone else could replace Mason. The pre-holiday weekend flew by like a blink of an eye. It was time to go home. Jenna realized that she missed Mason very much and was ready to forgive him anything. Although, of course, as they say, the resentment was gone, but the residue remained. Betty felt like a winner again. They just had a wonderful couple of days at the base, skiing and tubing, walking through the winter forest, roasting meat, drinking spicy mulled wine, playing board games in a big and friendly group. We laughed a lot and talked about interesting topics. Betty listened to a lot of thanks for the fact that she had guessed to bring everyone together and organize this trip. Most importantly, they were together at this time, Betty, Mason, Molly. There was no rushing or hurrying anywhere. Fully enjoying each other's company and hugging and laughing all the time. Betty decided that they needed to do this kind of outing more often. All of this was clearly good for their relationship. At first, Mason seemed anxious and lost. Apparently, he couldn't stop thinking about the lonely Jenna, but then he relaxed, calmed down, and began to enjoy the winter vacation. And the mistress flew to Dubai with a friend. That was wonderful. Betty sincerely hoped that she would meet some rich man there and not return to the USA. Why? Jenna is a blue-eyed blonde, a real beauty, so this option is quite possible. But as much as Betty didn't want it, the problem didn't solve itself. Jenna came back and immediately started texting Mason about how much she missed him. That was okay. Betty wasn't going to give up. Jenna had a favorite little brother. She'd raised him since he was a baby, helping his busy, tired mother. Now David was all grown up, 18 years old. Time has flown by quickly. From a cute, blonde-haired little kid, he turned into a handsome young man. He entered a sports college and was given a dormitory. Charles began his student life, of course. He often came to his sister. She was always happy to invite her relative and even helped him with money. But the young man wanted to earn money himself. "I'm looking for a job." One day he confessed to Jenna. "They promised to take me as a courier in the delivery service. You'll be in the snow and in the cold to travel around the city with a huge box on your shoulders." My sister shook her head. "And get change for it. You don't even have a car, so you should at least drive it. Otherwise, you'll be walking and taking buses." But what can I do? For now, we'll see. Everyone works somehow. Everyone? Jenna frowned. It's different for everyone. And the older sister reminded her brother of a story that had recently happened in their town. A courier, a young girl, brought an order to an apartment and fell into the clutches of drunken guys. The girl miraculously survived the encounter with the scumbags. But it was a girl. I'm a man. David brushed it off. What's the comparison? You think because you're a guy, you're safe? Well, sort of. David smiled. Come on, you're getting a little shady around town. It used to be quieter. All right, I'll talk to someone. Maybe I can get you a job driving for our firm. There's probably plenty of applicants. Your salaries are good. Yes, there are a lot of applicants. Agreed Jenna. But not every one of them has a sister working in the personnel department. Of course, the girl immediately wrote to Mason. In their branch, there was indeed a vacancy for a driver to unload materials. As a member of the Human Resources Department, Jenna could not help but know about it. The work is not much, the pay is good. David would be able to combine study and work perfectly and would not need money. Mason replied that he would take care of the matter. Jenna was sure that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow she would register her brother for a vacant position. Betty read the post about the vacancy and wondered. Another request that could be used in the struggle for marital happiness. The mistress would again be left with nothing. The woman suddenly remembered that she had a nephew living in Boston, so she dialed the number of a great aunt, his mother. It turned out that the nephew works at a local factory, works hard, and gets change. The situation was perfect. Betty happily told her aunt about the job opening and promised to talk to her husband. How did you know the Boston branch needed a driver? Mason looked at his wife in surprise. She had just asked him to hire her great-nephew for the job, describing beforehand how important the relationship with those relatives was to her and how she wanted to help them. I happened to run into Kathy, your boss's wife, at the mall. Mason wondered how bad the timing of all this was. After all, he'd promised a spot to Jenna's brother. She's gonna be upset again, but we already found someone. Mason, I called Human Resources. The position is still vacant. Say no to that person. Say it's taken. Do you have any idea what my aunt did for me? I just have to pay her back. A good job for her son is what's needed. Oh, please, for my sake. Mason heartily texted Jenna to tell her that he couldn't take her brother's job. Of course, the girl was upset. Resentment squeezed her heart. She even threw a plate on the floor in a fit of anger. Again, she was sidetracked. And the next day, the new driver added fuel to the fire. A radiant young man came to apply for a job. He happily shared that he had been told about the position by his great-aunt from New York, the wife of the Boston branch manager Mason. So once again, Betty, without realizing it herself, had screwed things up. Jenna felt herself slowly beginning to hate the woman. She was the reason Mason repeatedly rejected her requests, and he was becoming more and more frustrating. It seemed that Mason was gradually burning out. Their protracted relationship was becoming more and more like a habit. Jenna was very sad to realize it, because the girl still wanted to be near him, to hear his voice, to see attentive gray eyes, and yet the girl realized more and more clearly that their romance would lead to nothing. She had realized it from the beginning, but then passion overshadowed all rational thoughts. Jenna felt herself next to Mason exceptional and unique. He seemed willing to do anything for her. Mason really did a lot for Jenna, but lately his attention was clearly not enough for her. He was always dealing with family problems, working a lot. It was so humiliating to be on the sidelines, especially with so many available men around who would be happy to be near her. "Come visit me this weekend. I miss you so much," asked Jenna. Mason hadn't been in Boston in over a month. "Baby, I can't. There's a lot of work at the head office. Maybe it's the wife again." Mason sighed. He must have loved Jenna in his own way. He sure did. Why else couldn't he break off a relationship that had grown too serious? He liked a lot of things about her. Good looks, determination, wisdom. Despite her youth, Jenna was remarkably adequate. She never threw tantrums, never drove him crazy. Mason was sure that she would not get pregnant in order to marry him, and would not call Betty with offers to leave her husband. But lately, Jenna has been a little too jealous of his wife. Yes, indeed, there have been several incidents in which Mason has shown that family is more important to him than anything else, but he's never hidden that from Jenna. He admitted on their first date that he wasn't single, and several times during their time together, the man was ready to let her go when she wanted to leave. But Jenna had always come back, and Mason had been genuinely happy about it. He'd probably gotten used to having her around by now. Beautiful, in love, not too demanding, understanding. It was a shame that her behavior was changing. But maybe it's just some crisis in the relationship. It's necessary to be patient a little, and everything will be back to normal. Jenna sat with a glass of champagne, in a bubble bath. Being a village girl from a poor family, she never dreamed of such a life. A high-paying job, luxurious interiors, her own small business, a beautiful car, and a man she loved. True, things were not so smooth with the man. He belonged to another, and lately it was indicated more and more often and more vividly. Just at one moment, everything went wrong, as if someone upstairs decided that Jenna had enough personal happiness. Mason's not coming again, citing work, but it's probably all about family. I wonder if she needed help. Would he give up his wife, his kid, his office to support her? I'd have to see if he'd lie. But it's a test, and the future of their relationship depends on how Mason reacts. If he drops everything and flies to her, they'll be together. No. Jenna will pack her things and go to her mother's village for a few months, quit her job. Mason will be there. The business will be entrusted to Christina for the time being. She's her right-hand woman now. Her friend's in the loop. She'll be fine without her. And Jenna will get over her illness, cry and go back to being free. But that's plan B. The girl still hoped Mason would rush to her like he used to. Maybe in time he would even leave his wife, and they would build a family of their own. The phone clicked with a special beep, meaning Mason had a message from Jenna. Betty quickly read it. Okay, that makes sense. New request. The mistress is complaining to her husband about feeling awful vascular problems and wild headaches. I can't do anything. Probably have to go to the hospital. I need help with my business and personal support from my loved one. Betty thought about it. Her intuition told her it was a lie. Jenna is a young girl in the prime of life. The woman had seen the recent pictures she had sent her husband on a regular basis. In them, Jenna was strikingly fresh. Clean, radiant skin, light blush, bright eyes. Looking at the pictures, Betty thought that youth was still beautiful in itself. The girl clearly didn't look sick. Of course, all sorts of things happen. Her hypertensive crisis came on suddenly. But even if Jenna was really sick, let her heal herself. She was not a little girl. Mason took her to a high-paying position, helped her to establish a business, so the money for treatment at Madam clearly has, and care and attention let and demand from close relatives. No, Betty will not let her husband go to Boston anytime soon. Except that she has to come up with a reason, but she'll manage. Lately, Betty felt like she was just a generator of ideas. It didn't take long to think of one. When Betty was picking up her daughter from figure skating practice, she noticed a colorful poster on the wall of the sports center. A grand performance of the section's pupils at the big stadium was planned. The show promised to be bright and colorful. Betty approached Coach Molly. Hello, why isn't my daughter in the show? Molly's not ready yet. She has great prospects. Next year she will definitely show herself, but right now. Perhaps she needs extra lessons? I'm ready to pay for them, as long as my daughter gets to this concert. You see, we have elderly relatives visiting us. This may be the last time they come to New York. If they could see Molly, it would make them happy. I understand, but does your section need new equipment? If you put Molly on the program, I'll get it for you. All right. With apparent reluctance, the coach agreed. Only Molly will have a cameo. She is still small, and it doesn't matter. Betty shined. The main thing is that Molly will perform. At dinner, Mason said that the day after tomorrow, he would be flying to Boston to solve some work issues. Couldn't the business trip be rescheduled? Betty pretended to be surprised and upset by the news. Why? Something urgent again? I wanted to tell you such happy news. Our Molly has been accepted to perform at the Ice Palace. She's the smallest person in the show. Can you believe it? Mason looked proudly at his daughter sitting next to him. You're doing great. You're the star of the ice. Yes. Molly lowered her eyes modestly. I'm good. I've worked so hard, and now I'm going to perform. You're coming to watch, right, Daddy? Mason looked into his daughter's hopeful eyes. The man's choice was obvious. Jenna would soon receive another rejection. Another Betty-directed situation that should contribute to the destruction of the relationship, mistress and husband. Jenna was packing her things. She did not want to leave her apartment, which for 4 years had become almost native, but the girl was determined. This time she is definitely leaving Mason. He has shown her time and time again that family is more important to him. Jenna will always be in second place for him, even perhaps in third place. Then there's the job she adores. She's already bought the train tickets at the office. She herself has drawn up an order for her dismissal. The story's over. Jenna realized that she wanted to be the only one for her man. Perhaps it was time to start a family of her own. Christina recently got married and is now expecting a son. Looking at the family happiness, friends, Jenna realized that she dreams of the same, but a husband and a child. All of this is unthinkable while she's in a relationship with Mason. It was time to put a stop to it. Jenna no longer resented Mason, only the pain of knowing he loved another woman. The man had done so much for her, the girl felt grateful to him, and she would be sure to tell him that to his face or over the phone. But later, not now. Now it is necessary to wait it out, to get over it, to hide for a while. And then a new life would begin. Mason watched Molly's performance. He had come to the ice palace with a tricked-out professional camera. Betty watched as he tried to catch his daughter in the frame, not often succeeding. Just as the coach had warned, Molly flashed in the back rows, but the proud father didn't seem to notice. His eyes burned with genuine admiration for his child. Next to him lay a bouquet of roses prepared for the little star. Then the phone beeped again, the same beep that had alerted him to messages from Jenna. Mason didn't pay attention to the sound. He was completely absorbed in his daughter's performance, and Betty, of course, immediately read the text message and smiled victoriously. Jenna asked him not to look for her. She said it was over between them. She even quit her job at the Mason branch so she wouldn't have to see him. Sounds like a win to me. Although, of course, it's too soon to relax. Mason, back in his empty Boston apartment, felt an acute sense of guilt. Taken 4 years of Jenna's life. She could have met her destiny, gotten married, had children instead of wasting her youth on a futile relationship. His conscience was soothed only by the fact that he still helped this girl to establish a business and become financially independent. But the sadness and regret that he and Jenna were not together now, strangely enough, was not there. On the contrary, the man even felt relieved. Now he wouldn't have to flit between his wife and his mistress, trying to pay attention to both. There would no longer be that oppressive feeling of guilt in front of Jenna and Betty. The situation had resolved itself. Lucky. Betty was celebrating the victory with her best friend Kelly. The women were sitting at a pizza place near their office. It was lunch hour. Good for you. Kelly praised the woman. She overcame her resentment, was able to forgive the man she loved, and kept her family together. She pulled it off so masterfully, and it's like she had nothing to do with it. Yes, I'm a strategist, it turns out. Betty agreed. Mason, I think, has come to value family even more. At least he's trying to make time for us. But, Mason's already had an affair. I don't want to scare you, but it's almost certain to happen again if he's capable of it. What are you gonna do then? Well, Betty set her glass down on the table. A cold determination appeared in her gaze. Well, in that case, I already know exactly what to do. The blonde said, looking at her newborn daughter. An orderly walking by angrily scut the blonde. Oh my God! Aren't you ashamed to talk like that? She's an innocent child. The nurse left, and the young mother again looked into the serene face of her daughter and repeated in a whisper, My eyes would not look at you. And she burst into tears. Life was ruined at the root. A golden 22 years. And here she lies, sleeping, yes, sniffling. This little girl's wonderful, all-around charming daddy owned a diner down the road. He was a practical man. Did I promise you anything? No. Well, you can solve your own problems. Ashhole, she shouted. Don't expect me to give you your car back. You gave it to me, so I'll keep it, ashhole. You can drive it for all I care. He smiled, and Wendy, not from anger at his carefree complacency, wanted right now to take and run over him, this very car. And in the women's clinic, she was so tortured with a referral for abortion that when the coveted paper was in her hands, it was as useful as a bridge along the river. Get out! The gynecologist bellowed at her. Couldn't you come earlier? I couldn't. The pregnant woman said. They wouldn't give me a referral. They kept dragging and dragging. How could I come earlier? You couldn't come before, and you can't come now either. Get out of here. And then there was a friend who said something about a grandmother who lives in the suburbs, but can help if you bring her money and food at once and promise to keep quiet. The grandmother lived in a private house somewhere on the outskirts of the suburbs and in general was not distinguished by politeness either. How long has it been? She asked angrily, and having heard the answer, repeated what the gynecologist had already said. What else have you got in mind? What perhaps told you that the grandmother is ancient, to think long ago forgot to think? I've been a gynecologist for 30 years. She's here, and she's flapping her eyes. Do you realize why you're here? It's a full-fledged surgical operation. Where did you go before, you slutty bimbo? We went back to town in silence. Don't be so sad. My friend comforted me. Maybe it will somehow dissolve itself. Yeah, in 3 months, gloomily replied the girl. Maybe it will not dissolve, but a baby is also not bad. You have to have a baby sometime. They say it rejuvenates the body. Yes, rejuvenates, and cabbage also grows breasts. No tenderness and love for the child she did not feel, and he, as if sensing this, and tormented the future mother, incessant nausea, edema, and low blood pressure. On top of all, pure maiden skin, now covered with pimples, and do not want to look at themselves in the mirror. But if I had to, it ended with a flood of tears and fierce self-loathing. I'm ugly, she repeated in horror, looking at her blurred figure. There is no waist left at all. And what kind of legs have become? Thick as an elephant's. Her ankles are swollen, now they're as big as her knees, and her breasts are as big as a peasant's. Wendy used to be proud of her chiseled, delicate figure. She was glad that she could eat everything she wanted and not gain a single gram of extra weight. And her hair? That used to be so lush long, like a mermaid, but now they split so that I had to cut them off by 20 centimeters. And for some reason it always looks dirty, as it often does. Think of the baby. Everyone around them was yelling. Did Wendy feel like screaming? Yeah, why? Why should I think of this baby? I didn't want it, and I don't want it. I'm only going to have a baby because they wouldn't give me an abortion referral for a long time. And you, like crazy people, think about the baby, think about the baby. Think for yourselves, if you're so smart. With endless tears and worries, Wendy brought the situation to the point that right from the next examination in the consultation, she was taken directly to the maternity hospital for preservation. Her blood pressure was so high that she had to spend a whole day on a bed in intensive care under a drip. But the labor was a breeze. Wendy had no time to be frightened. The midwife was already showing her daughter. What a beauty you have. Look at her. She looks just like her mom. But the mother did not want to look, closed her eyes, and even turned her head the other way just in case. Well, well, roughly encouraged her midwife. It happens, nothing. You will sleep, recover, and love will cover. Nothing, you will still be happy about your daughter, you will. She wasn't happy. Not then, not later. Never at all. The girl did not sleep at night, and the mother spent hours at the crib, shaking it. For some reason it was unpleasant for her to take the child in her arms, and all these sleepless nights, half asleep, tired days, in her head she had only one persistent thought. Why didn't I leave her in the maternity hospital? By now I would be free as the wind again. It was a shame to realize that life was passing her by. There were sunny spring days, and if it were not for my daughter, you could go for a walk, watch a new movie, eat a fruit ice cream, not hurrying somewhere in the park. And the money? How much money was now spent on a screaming child that no one wanted, not the father or the mother? Wendy bit her lip to keep from screaming in anger every time she went into the store. If she were free, she could buy everything here, or almost everything, and certainly that black dress and the scarlet shoes, the perfume that had just come into fashion. She'd stop looking in any stores at all, except for groceries, to avoid getting upset. I'm a klutz, with despair, thought the young mother. A wretched, half-impoverished, half-needed Plutchin. Wendy was firmly convinced that from now on her life would be a dull crawl from the playground to the store and home. Every day, all the time, forever, and without mercy. When the little girl turned 2, a miracle happened. Wendy was noticed by an interesting older man. He smelled of quiet strength and great possibilities. Had I finally gotten lucky? She thought with a sinking heart. In her dreams, Wendy saw herself in a snow-white dress and with a huge bouquet of flowers, holding the hand of her respectable husband. She would walk out of the marriage institution and get into an elegant black car. They will go on a wedding trip, and when they return, a splendidly decorated apartment will be waiting for them. Or better yet, not an apartment, but a whole house. Something not heavy and not stingy, but as if floating light, certainly with huge windows, so that there was a lot of air. It will be possible to start living like a human being, to start some unusual hobby, to wear a beautiful dress at home, to wait for her husband from work in the evenings. And then a shrill child's roar broke into her sweet dreams. Here it comes. That clumsy Lisa had fallen again, or hit something, or burned herself. I wonder if it's all kids trying to kill themselves all the time. Or is it just Wendy who's unlucky? Get up. She pulled her crying daughter to her feet. Get up, my misfortune. Let's get dressed. We're going for a walk now. Dressing, by the way, was a separate agony. Lousy girl did not want to stand still and endlessly twirled on the spot. Are you going to stand or not? Wendy shouted, What are you doing to me, you little brat? Stand still and don't move. The girl froze fearfully in place. Her eyes were round and blue, just like her father's, the fool. Wendy thought, just as round, big and dull. The memory made the mood even angrier. And Wendy tugged her daughter roughly by the scruff of the neck. Let's go. No, wait. She tore a piece of paper out of her notebook and scribbled a few words on it. She stuffed the piece of paper into a bag, along with a bun, a bottle of water. Now let's go move it, you bastard. She shouted and grabbed the little girl's hand and dragged her behind her. The woods were close by, and it was beautiful. Wendy was glad she wouldn't have to go across town with the baby and spend money on transportation. And she wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. Girls, I really like the woods. Squatting down, she watched with curiosity as a ladybug, crawling along the blades of grass. Wendy's brain was working feverishly fast. Get it far away, no one will find it, but they'll find the body, and then they can get to me. Better leave it here then. Maybe someone will pick it up. I need to rent an apartment in another neighborhood now. Right today. Someplace where nobody knows me, and I can rent mine. Faster. I just need it fast. Lisa, she called out to her daughter. Stay here and wait. I'll be there soon. And she walked away, pretending to go to the nearest bushes, but she moved on to the place where she had left the car. And the farther Wendy walked away from her daughter, the more happiness filled her whole being. Freedom. Could it be that at last she could beg her freedom from fate? Could she really come home right now and throw away all the children's things? Could she really be free? Lisa had no recollection of how she had gotten into the orphanage, and that could even be considered a kind of luck. At least she had never known the homesickness that tormented the other kids. All of them taken away from alcoholic parents or early deprived of mom and dad, were homesick. Lisa had comforted them more than once, crying furtively, not opening her heart to anyone, and every time she wiped their tears, hugging them, she thought about how lucky she was after all. Her 2-year-old, her caregivers told her, was found all alone in the woods, with a bag containing a bun, a scraggly stuffed lion cub, and a note. The girl's name is Lisa. She's healthy, not cranky. Take her away. I can't take care of her. A local forester found the little girl and told later that he found her very close to the edge of the forest. Immediately after he came to the road with a frozen baby in his arms, he immediately heard the sound of a car leaving and even managed to notice that the car was white. But whose car was it? What were the license plates? It all remained a mystery, and in the next few years no one tried to solve it. By nightfall, the man brought the girl to the nearest orphanage, where a kind-hearted nanny gave the little girl warm tea and sandwiches, and then bathed her and put her on a free bed. In those days, such sad stories happened in great numbers. The girl's name was changed, as they always did with foundlings to change their fate for the better. And Lisa became Kathy, an orphanage pupil and officially an orphan. Kathy, however, had a good life. The head of the orphanage was of that rare breed of people for whom work was a vocation. The same fanatical attitude to the work she demanded from the whole staff, and that's why only those for whom the happiness and comfort of their little pupils was paramount stayed there. So in the orphanage were affectionate nannies, strict but fair educators, and all together they created an atmosphere close to the family. Later, having already become an adult, Kathy often had to hear that orphanage residents are wild people, socially unadapted, and moreover piously convinced that the whole world owes them by right of orphanhood. It was said that a graduate of an orphanage can be immediately deduced because he has no idea what it is to keep clean or wash dishes. But it wasn't like that in Kathy's childhood. First of all, this orphanage, or, as the adults preferred to call it, a children's institution, was private. The spouses, who had spent half their lives working in state orphanages, decided in the 90s to open a private orphanage, the first in the region. They had to act at their own risk. Not only that in those years everyone was afraid of racketeers, but there was no support from friends. You want to cash in on a child's grief? This is the mildest of what the couple heard from those whom they used to consider friends. And what's more hurtful? Even from relatives. They had to grit their teeth and go forward, supporting each other and learning to grow rhinoceros skin along the way. Otherwise, it was possible to give up all their plans at once, but the racketeers, like their neighbors, friends, and relatives, took to the new project in the state, almost with enthusiasm. It was strictly forbidden to collect tribute from the self-sacrificing founders of the orphanage, but all kinds of support and assistance were encouraged. Of course, in this matter, the racketeering kings pursued their own interests. First of all, charity was a good way to launder money. But the main majority had already managed to realize that soon enough the bandits' freedom would end, and those who were smarter began to transfer assets into legal business, and a businessman who generously donates to charity is traditionally more trustworthy. There was another major difference between the orphanage and the others. Labor education was the norm here. Of course, acquaintances with a fierce envy to the prosperous business immediately arranged it, and on the subject of the use of child labor. But all those who came at the request of the commission left with nothing. All safety rules were observed, and there were no children exhausted from fatigue. The superintendent, everyone's favorite Vanessa, established reasonable orders. statistics on the children in the orphanages. She told everyone who came to apply for a job. Could scare anyone. About 10% managed to make it in life. 40% become alcoholics, drug addicts, prison inmates. Why does that happen? Many reasons. But one of them strikes me as particularly important. In most orphanages, technicians clean, cooks cook, cleaners take care of clothes and shoes. Growing up children in adulthood are helpless. They do not know how to clean the house and do not even understand why they need to clean the house, how to cook dinner. In the end, they do not have even basic ideas about how to plan a budget for the month. To lose money in the first 2 or 3 days, and then to borrow money from acquaintances until the end of the month is the norm for them. That is why our institution has introduced a system of labor education. Children should realize that in adult life, no one will owe them anything. The children learn to keep clean and cook on their own, and older kids earn their first money and learn how to handle it. Someone admired such methods, someone did not accept them, but the headmistress was adamant. We are not raising future dependents, not a contingent for prisons, but full-fledged members of society. Our goal is to release into the big world a person who will work and appreciate the work of others, who will create a family and become a responsible parent. Starting at the age of 7, the children cleaned their rooms every weekend and took turns in the kitchen, helping to wash dishes and cook. Each room was awarded prize points, and at the end of the week, winners could exchange their points for candy, another purchase, or a trip somewhere. High school students were given the opportunity to earn extra money. There was an extensive vegetable garden on the adjoining property. In winter, when there was nothing to do in the vegetable garden, the children were offered to clear snow from the territory or perform some minor repairs under the guidance of a tutor. And although such labor education not always met with great enthusiasm, but still graduates and years later thanked Vanessa for the fact that in the big life they were released, not savages. And Kathy was grateful to both her orphanage and Vanessa for the fact that in her independent life she was not confused. A small but own apartment allocated by the state and work almost immediately found. At first Kathy worked as a molder in a dumpling shop, then for some time stood behind the cash register in a supermarket, and a little later she got a job in a veterinary clinic. There the work was quieter. All she had to do was to make appointments for clients and take payment. So she worked for a year, resting from the hustle and bustle and the need to rotate on all turns. She loved it at the clinic. She even had the idea of studying to be a veterinarian. And perhaps everything was very feasible if it were not for one small but very significant but. Robert showed up at the clinic like the sun. A blonde-haired, 2-meter-tall, Viking-like hero with a red kitty who turned out to be unbelievably small in his huge hands. I beat the dogs off the street. He said worriedly, "Look, is it safe?" Poor little thing was frightened. His voice was enveloping and thick, like warm honey. Kathy couldn't resist and reached out to pet the cat. It was hardly in need of help. It was dozing peacefully, nestled on the chest of its savior. When the girl's hand touched it, the kitty lazily opened its golden eyes. "I'll get the doctor now," said the girl. "You wait a minute." Only one of the 4 doctors was free, and Kathy was very glad that the only one available was a man. The ladies would have flirted with the handsome visitor, and then Kathy did not have time to think. The Viking had already left the office, and his red-haired pet had gone back to sleep. "Is everything all right?" Kathy smiled. "Thank goodness. How much do we owe for the appointment?" Kathy quickly entered all the owner's information into the computer and printed out the pet exam report. While he was paying, the girl was thinking about what else she could talk to this touching giant about. "Robert," she asked, "will you keep the kitty?" He blew affectionately on the cat's ear. "Where will she go now? I'll bring her back in 2 weeks for vaccinations. I should think of a name for her. Maybe you can give me a hint? She's so golden-eyed, red as honey." Kathy smiled. "She probably needs a sweet name, honey," and bent a beautiful eyebrow at the Viking and immediately laughed at his own joke. "No, it's too long. Halva." "Right. Let's go with Halva. It's so sweet. What's up?" "Let's go home, Halva. Goodbye." He squinted and read the name tag. "Kathy, see you in 2 weeks." Exactly 14 days later, Robert stepped through the door of the veterinary clinic, which was open due to the summer heat. In his arms was a red-haired and golden, combed and rounded Halva. "Good afternoon." He smiled dazzlingly. Kathy's heart throbbed. In 2 weeks, the impression Robert had made on her had faded. "Why am I so excited?" she asked herself. "So what if he was a good-looking guy? Aren't there enough of them?" And yet she waited for this day. She saved some money and went to a beauty salon to get a manicure, and then the hairdressers persuaded her to get a melamine, and it turned out that it was not in vain. Now the girl's hair seemed almost twice as voluminous and shimmered beautifully in the sun. Kathy even began to color, going to work, although previously considered it unnecessary. And she began to wear her few pieces of jewelry, a simple silver ring and earrings with small transparent stones. The earrings had been given to her by the head of the orphanage herself for her excellent studies. The ring was a gift from a sponsor for March 8th. Now Kathy felt almost beautiful when she met Viking Robert. "Here comes Halva for her vaccination," she said and went over to pet the kitty. "How are you doing?" Has the kitty already settled in the house? In fact, she could have waited for Robert to come closer to the reception desk. But Kathy wanted to show off her slim figure, which the uniform could not hide. Robert glanced at the girl with an appraising gaze. "She's settled in, and that's very nice, because it's boring to live alone, and there's a cat waiting at home." "Kathy, I could hear some hidden hint in those words." "You don't say," she sighed. "I live alone too, and sometimes I get bored. And you?" Robert winked. "Come and visit. When you get bored, call me. You have my contacts, right?" "This is awkward." The girl was embarrassed. "What's awkward about it?" The Viking was nobly indignant. "Come, Halva and I will be waiting for you." That same evening, Kathy met up with her best friend to discuss the news. Nancy she had met long ago back at the orphanage. Nancy was 10 years old when she was taken away from her father, a bitter drunk. On her first night in the orphanage, the girl tucked her nose into the corner of her pillow and blissfully said, "How nice it is here." Kathy sat up on the bed from surprise. "You're so good." "Shocked," she exhaled. "Other people cry for weeks and weeks, and you say it's good. What's bad about it?" Nancy was surprised. "The bed's clean, the food's good, nobody drinks. It's good." And the next day she told Kathy all about it and how she had begged on the street to buy a bottle for her father, because otherwise he beat her. And about how one day her father disappeared somewhere, and the girl didn't eat anything for 3 whole days. And only when she fainted at school, they took her to the hospital, and from there they brought her to the orphanage. They said Daddy went to get treatment for alcoholism. She snorted. "They say that when my dad gets well, he'll get a job and take me home. They lie like I'm a little girl. He's cured, of course." "Well," Kathy suggested thoughtfully, "maybe he really wants to be cured. We had a girl, but her mother gave up drinking and took her back. Now they come to visit every Saturday and bring candy." "That's not my daddy," Nancy said sadly. "He'll never give up his booze." But that's where she was wrong. Nancy's father was indeed treated in a narcological dispensary and forever forbade himself even to think about drinking. Moreover, he got a job and visited his daughter every night. After 6 months, he was able to take her away for good. Nancy's father turned out to be a talented carpenter and often came to the shelter with his daughter, each time with some new gift: new chairs for the babies, long benches for the dining room, and once he made 10 closets for the children's rooms and didn't charge a penny for his work. Though Vanessa insisted on paying for it. "You took care of my daughter," he said, while I, like a dog, the last. Tears of remorse and shame welled up in his eyes. He never stopped blaming himself for the past. When Nancy turned 18, her father was gone. Some hooligans attacked him as he was walking after work in the evening and beat him badly. The man died on the spot from the beating. Nancy got her father's apartment, but she had no job, and Vanessa came to the rescue again. She helped Nancy to pass the secretarial courses and took a job with her. But she didn't work for long. "The pay is low. There are no prospects," she said, "and secretaries are required many places. I'll get a job in some firm so that the boss is a man. You know what I mean? I want to live like a man, not work for an idea." Only much later Kathy could guess from the fragmentary stories of her friend that her father, driven by an eternal sense of guilt for his former drunkenness, had spoiled his daughter too much. That's where Nancy got that unpleasant arrogance and ironclad confidence that she deserved the best and preferably for free. She managed to get her dream job after all. The ideal lasted for 3 months, and at the beginning of the 4th month, the boss's wife flew into their office like a furious fury. The boss was just enjoying his morning coffee, and the pretty secretary was sitting on his lap. Nancy was out of work that morning and missing a few other little things. A few strands of hair and 3 broken fingernails. For a month Nancy sat unemployed, nursing her bruises and complaining to Kathy about the injustice of her fate. A job offer from a friend at a veterinary clinic she turned down, but she was lucky again. Her next employer turned out to be a widower, and now it was possible not to fear jealous wives. Since then, the girl managed to make repairs in the apartment and even have their own, although not expensive, car. With Kathy, however, they were friends almost as before. That is, Kathy pretended not to notice the increasing arrogance of her friend. "I don't know what to do, Nancy," she confessed that evening. "There's this man I met, and didn't you notice if he was coming in his own car or what?" Nancy interrupted her. "How's he dressed? Is he wearing brand-name clothes or market clothes? Clothes like clothes." Kathy frowned. "I don't know your brands, and I don't know what he's driving." Nancy sighed brokenly. "When will you learn to pay attention to such things? It's very important. A handsome face is one thing, but maybe he doesn't have any other virtues besides a pretty face. So what then? What's that got to do with it? So now we have to evaluate every man we meet and see if he's rich or poor? Is it better to waste time with a pauper? Live on a dime and admire his pretty face until he gets sick? All right, well, you gotta take a chance anyway. Stop by his place if he wants you to. See where he... It had been 3 months. No, Kathy, this was not the deal." Robert smiled crookedly at the sight of the certificate from the antenatal clinic. "You should have thought about avoiding pregnancy." He looked terribly confident. He looked at his friend as condescendingly as a wise adult looks at a misbehaving child. "You can't fool me, but I'm not angry with you." That's what was clear in his gaze. And that condescension was so disgusting that Kathy lowered her head so as not to see it. So that was it. turns out pregnancy was something to be avoided. Why hadn't they agreed on that right away? Wasn't there anything you should have thought of? Asked the girl. 2 people have children. I am a man, he answered simply. After all, it is not me to go 9 months pregnant, to give birth and a child alone to raise, too, not me. From me only alimony, and even then not much. So pregnancy and everything that is connected with it, it is a woman's care. From this simple reasoning on the soul of Kathy became even more disgusting. It can be like that. It seems that a person argues logically, consistently, and you listen and realize that he is just a coward. I thought we were in love, she said sadly. You said yourself that you love me, didn't you? Don't you remember? I do, but I didn't say I wanted to have children. Robert pointed out. Why put it all in one place? And to tell the truth, he wasn't lying. There was no talk of children, but Kathy thought that one thing implied another. The holy woman Vanessa and the whole wonderful orphanage staff taught their pupils to take care of themselves and others, not to wait for help from the state, to earn their own money, but how to teach them to beware of people's irresponsibility, thoughtlessness, common dishonesty? Kathy, noticing her friend's distress, Robert began. Let's talk frankly. We have not been together long enough, and it is too early to talk about true love. At most about falling in love, attraction, and passion. Wouldn't you agree that's true? Maybe it is. Kathy didn't disagree. It's probably true. But don't you realize that the situation has changed? Our with you love, do not love, it is now a matter of tenth. There is a child, it is already there, and you and I, as parents, need to think about its future, not about our own hobbies. We can agree on that. This baby, Kathy, is not good for you or me right now. Get rid of it, and you and I can continue to date, get to know each other, and who knows, maybe someday. I've been gotten rid of too. The girl interrupted him. My father and mother didn't need me either, so they took me to the forest. But that's quite an atrocity. Robert was horrified, but I don't want it to come to that. Look, what's 5 weeks? It's just a clot of cells, but if left unchecked, it could ruin both our lives. You want us to make a deal? I'm making a deal, and you don't like it. It's not a deal. Kathy flared up. Doesn't that mean finding a solution that works for everyone? Do you want to be happy? Is that what you think of me? It's not for you. It's for me to get an abortion. And you want to buy that we'll keep seeing each other. And maybe get married someday. Do you think I want to be in a relationship with a traitor? I'm not a traitor. I'm being honest about what I want. And if you decide to have the baby, you know I won't want to continue the relationship. I'm not planning on rushing into this. You'll file for child support, of course, and I'll have to pay for something I didn't want and don't want. Imagine going to the store, looking at something, and they won't let you out until you pay. How is that fair? You don't even have any money on you. You just came in to wait out the rain. But no, they make you pay. It's not fair, finally. What if you went to the store, took a bite of cake, they make you pay for it? Is that fair? Don't twist things around, Kathy. Besides, have you thought about yourself? Okay, me, my well-being is not part of your calculations, I get that. What about you? You can't get a big alimony check. You wanted to study, but if you decide to keep the baby, what's the point of studying? Think about it. I'm asking you to think about it. I've already thought about everything. The girl said firmly and looked at Robert, right into his handsome face. There was no love left. Washed it away with a wave of cold Robert's cynicism, all his supposedly reasonable reasoning, but in fact just designed to mask the fear that now his cozy, quiet life will change. "What did I see in you?" she asked quietly. "You look like a big, strong man, but inside you're a little boy who's afraid of everything." "You're afraid of everything, Robert. You only had enough to pick up a stray cat, and you don't want to know your own child." "Calm down, you fool. Don't cry. We don't need your alimony." She left without even slamming the door behind her. Robert rubbed his forehead and smiled. A stone had fallen from his soul. He was truly grateful to Kathy for her pride, the kind that if she said she didn't need alimony, she wouldn't ask for it. Oh, and he'd already started thinking of ways to get a smaller amount out of his income. He'd have to negotiate at work to draw him a certificate of his miserable salary, and that would be so tedious. He'd made a mistake with Kathy, of course. He thought that since she worked in a famous clinic, she probably had a good salary and a nice apartment, but the main bummer was that when he was making inquiries about the clinic, he found pictures of its owner, Wendy, on the internet. And when he saw Kathy, he nearly collapsed on the floor. The young receptionist looked uncannily like Wendy. Robert was sure that Kathy was the daughter of the clinic owner. Probably the mother had decided to let her favorite daughter work under supervision. Why, the work is not dusty, and on a salary, who would hurt his child? And in the long run, the girl, the owner of the clinic. No, it's definitely a good fit. Who knew she was a former foster kid? And her salary is meager, and her apartment is a studio apartment that hasn't been renovated in 100 years. Though Kathy tries somehow to improve her poor dwelling, to plaster here and there, to paste tiles here, as they say, poor but clean. I put up new wallpaper, but you can't hide poverty. It climbs out of every crevice, annoying, insolent, but that's for those who know how to look. In short, it's good that Kathy got rid of her without too much trouble. He doesn't need a pregnant orphan. And Kathy wanted to talk to someone to try to find a way out of all this hopelessness. Nancy, on learning of her friend's pregnancy, was almost hysterical. "How can you be so naive?" She screamed. They all sing songs about love as long as they want their own. As soon as they get their tails pinched, they say, "No, no, no, no. I don't owe you anything. I didn't promise you anything." And your eyes are as flat as a plonk, like carrots. Kathy grinned. Or like a cat's, big and round, round. "Oh, Kathy," my friend shook her head sadly. "You should have consulted me." Men, what are they like? Well, like stray dogs. They should be accustomed to themselves slowly, gradually, without pressure, and you immediately boom, a shoe on the head. All right, let's think about how to cope. And how I'll give birth. Raise them. Give birth? In syllables, interrogated Nancy. "You, Kathy, do you realize what you're saying?" "What are you talking about?" "All right, don't dust. I know a good clinic. It's confidential, safe. I'll take you there. I'm going into labor." The girl repeated stubbornly, "I've already decided. It's not too late to change your mind before it's too late. But you understand, it's, I don't even know, a kitten, and then you think 100 times. And this is a whole baby. Is that why you don't have cats?" Kathy smiled. Kathy. She was stopped at the front door by the owner of the clinic. "I need to talk to you." "Come in right now, it's urgent." Actually, the owner's appearance at the clinic was an unusual event in itself. Wendy rarely came here, preferring to conduct her business from home. Thank goodness modern communications allowed for that. Plus, she often left the receptionist in her place and went to warm countries with her daughter. "Our winters are too long," she'd say. "We need a break from it somehow." In the owner's absence, her ex-husband, Benjamin, was in charge, It was said that he had once been a rich man, and it was in those carefree times that he had married the beautiful Wendy, who was a couple of decades younger than he was. He was flattered that his young wife, only 20 years old against his 40, was the winner of the City Beauty contest. He had organized her winning the contest himself as a wedding present. To keep Wendy busy, he bought a dyeing business from a friend on the cheap and gave it to his wife. Wendy, on the other hand, started reluctantly, but then suddenly got involved. She really wanted her veterinary clinic to become the best in town, and she achieved this by using her husband's money and listening to his advice. But then dark times came for Benjamin. His business went under, taking his half-brother as his manager. Benjamin, after a few months, found he'd been ripped off. Wendy, with a newborn daughter, was instantly taken over by his brother. The bankrupt businessman decided that enough of his dangerous games and went to work in an ordinary carpentry shop. He had less money, but his son became healthy. Wendy did not long enjoy marital happiness with her second husband. The money was wasted, and the careless owner went to jail for burglary. Confused and unhappy Wendy tried to return to Benjamin, but he refused to accept her. But he did not refuse to help her if she needed to look after the affairs of the veterinary clinic. Why would he do that? Out of Christian charity, out of pity for his hapless ex, or out of concern for his daughter, no one knew. But today Wendy, personally present at the clinic, and moreover, talked to the usual receptionist. It was doubly unusual. Up to this point, she had only gone as far as talking to the doctors. In the office, there was already a tea table set with sweets. "Help yourself," invited the proprietress. "Thank you, Wendy. I've just had breakfast. Did you say it was urgent?" "Yes, indeed I did." She smiled so insincerely that Kathy didn't immediately realize she wasn't going to hear anything good. "You grew up in an orphanage, didn't you?" Wendy asked. "In an orphanage. I always seem to," said the warden thoughtfully. "That orphanage kids are so unstable, and I see you know what's what in this life. Our orphanage was special." Kathy smiled. "We were taught to cook, to clean, and even to earn money. Vanessa, this is our supervisor." "Vanessa?" Wendy asked. I know. We were in the same school, even in the same class. She was always so helpful, kind. I remember all the stray dogs knew her because she fed them. True, after school we did not communicate with her, but I heard about the shelter. Sometimes I wish I'd given her my queen." "Who?" "Yes, my daughter Emily." The woman sighed. "You know," in a trusting tone of voice, she said. "She's already 17, and she still can't cut her own bread. She seems to know where the money comes from, but how it's earned." She wrote today, "Mom, I'm going shopping with my girlfriends today. Put 10 to 15,000 on my card. This money is like a dime to her." What kind of world does she live in? The real world, or some fairy tale about the golden antelope? Wendy stopped talking and angrily blew a strand of hair out of her face. "So I decided to follow your Vanessa's example. I'm going to teach her to work. Do you think that's a good idea?" Kathy looked at her boss in confusion. Why would she want to consult with a receptionist? Labor education is good for everyone. So it's a great idea. I think so too. Wendy was delighted. "I've decided to take the fool to work. Let her start her working career under my supervision. She can start by sitting at the front desk. You teach her everything, okay? And once she's learned everything, I'll hire her full-time. And by then, you'll have enough time to find something else to do." "Stop!" Unexpectedly, I interrupted my boss, Kathy. "Do you want me to leave?" "Well, yes." Wendy shrugged. "My Emily has to work somewhere to keep you too. What's the point?" I want Emily to learn to earn her own allowance. And if she works part-time, what will she earn, Tears? So we have a deal, Kathy. Will you teach Emily? Well, how could I not? The girl smiled. Of course I will, and I'll teach her, and I'll quit, so that only your idle girl will do something. Don't get your hopes up, Wendy. I won't do it. Don't be rude to me. You're still working for me, don't forget. Not anymore. That's for me to decide, not you. How dare you talk to me like that? How dare you talk to people like that? You have to work 2 more weeks. The boss yelled at me. And where did all her charm and allure go? Smooth and well-groomed face, created for smiles and successful photos, suddenly became somehow frozen like a mask. And only her lips curved ugly, and her eyes burned with the wild anger of a landlady whom she had suddenly disobeyed, a serf. You are bound by the law. Do you even know that there is such a thing as labor law? Kathy suddenly realized why Wendy's face looked so frightening. She couldn't even frown because of the Botox injections. And that lack of facial expression, combined with the angry look and the shrill voice, was the scariest thing of all. The labor code. You ever heard of it? Have you heard anything about hiring and firing procedures? Have you ever signed an employment contract with me? No. I work unofficially so you, Wendy, can pay less tax. So don't scare me. It's pointless. I don't owe you anything. And I'm leaving immediately. Good luck adjusting your Emily to the real world. I have connections. Wendy hissed back at her. It's not hard to make a contract and forge your signature. Go ahead. Kathy agreed almost cheerfully. And I have the number of the tax office. I can tell a lot of interesting things. But despite the apparent victory from the clinic, Kathy went out almost in despair. Was the whole world conspiring against her? Everyone had turned their backs, everyone. Her lover, her friend, and now no job. Where was she supposed to go now? Jesus Christ, what to do now? Go home. I told Kathy to go home. What do we do? We'll figure that out later. Right now, go home, make some tea and think about it. But home was only slightly easier. It was uncomfortable to sit alone in 4 walls. I wanted to talk to someone, not to complain, but just to be near someone alive, a human voice to hear. The girl suddenly wanted to visit her shelter. Probably, just as an adult in a difficult situation, and for the first time in all this time, Kathy suddenly felt her heavy, painful tension let go. The fear of the future. She can handle it. The world is not without good people. And the proof of that was sitting across from her. Thank you, Vanessa, she smiled. And suddenly she felt bitter tears flowing down her cheeks. Don't cry, the woman said sternly, and immediately stroked the head of her pupil. That's what we are, people to help each other, and otherwise how to live. I'm just a little ashamed. Kathy confessed. I just came to stay here, to remember my childhood, but it was like asking for help. Vanessa nodded and smiled. And you're ashamed of that. Remember something, girl, something I read somewhere, and it's always stuck in my memory. Asking for help doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're not alone in the world. That's it, Kathy. That's it. And here's the other thing. By the time our baby's born, it'll be 5 years since you got your apartment. Here's what we could do. You could move in with us, live in a shelter, and rent out your apartment. You'll get an allowance, and you'll work, so you'll make a reasonable amount of money. And then you'll study, and you won't need to be wise. You'll earn a normal income. Kathy smiled through her tears, nodded and thanked. Vanessa was the only person who supported her in such a difficult moment. It would seem so. But who am I to her? How many Kathys does she have? Well, That's the kind of person Vanessa is. She wouldn't leave you in the lurch. I got her to scrub floors too, Vanessa. I talked to a sponsor. He needs a cleaner in his office. Evening hours. Would you do it? It's not paying $1 million, but a little extra money wouldn't hurt. Right? You'll have a salary. The office is small. You can do everything in 40 minutes. You'll come after the end of the working day. That is at 7. What do you say? Thank you, I say, Vanessa, replied Kathy. I'm all for it. How far is the office? Just a stone's throw away. And by the way, you can start today. Payment is once a week on your card on Mondays. Kathy was almost happy. Now she wasn't so scared of the future. At the shelter, she worked as a cook 2 days and 2 days out with another girl. And now another part-time job that wasn't hard. Of course, it's infinitely far from her dream job, she repeated to herself, but in our position, there's no point in getting cocky. We have some money, and that's fine. And then the baby would be born, and there would be more and allowances, and money from renting an apartment, and maybe we could even study. She wanted badly to share her joy with someone, but at least with Nancy, though she wouldn't appreciate it. But Nancy was away at some resort with her chief lover and was unavailable for communication. After a couple of months, the friends did get to see each other, but Kathy quickly realized that sharing good news with Nancy was a really bad idea. Scrubbing floors is for beggars. Nancy snorted. I'm sorry, Kathy, but if you're down to it, you know it's just a dump. You're all ready. She glanced disapprovingly at her friend's washed-out t-shirt and skirt, which had obviously been chosen only for its elasticized waistband, but had no other merit. You're already one step away from the bottom, she finished confidently. For example, look at what you're wearing. It's a disgrace, not clothes. Do not sew normal clothes for pregnant women. I'm dressed like this because I'm coming from work, and my job is mopping floors. It's stupid to show up in a dressy outfit and mop. Well, let's say. Nancy agreed, but what you're wearing is old and faded, and your hair is all gone. She lifted a strand of her friend's hair with 2 fingers. Kathy immediately pulled back. She'd never liked that kind of unceremonious touching. You've got all the roots growing out. It's so unkempt. You look like a beggar. And I am a beggar now. Kathy wasn't offended at all. If I was kicked out of my job, it means you didn't work hard enough. You should have worked harder. No, it means that my boss's daughter has to start somewhere. So now she works as a receptionist in a clinic. And I can write my own letter of resignation and be on my way. But I left without a letter of resignation. No one officially hired me, so there's no one to fire. Isn't there any registrars needed anywhere else? Like this? And Kathy pointed to her eloquently rounded belly. You wouldn't believe it, they don't. Who needs an employee who's about to go on maternity leave? And to us washerwomen, somehow easier to treat. No registration, no maternity pay. You come in, you clean up, you get paid. Money. Nancy gave me a scornful look. You call that money? You don't need much. I wouldn't lift a finger for that little thing. I have no choice. Kathy answered calmly, when you don't have any money at all, you'll be glad to have something to put on your plate. Kathy bit her lip and was silent for a long time. She saw that her friend didn't understand her at all and judged her, which was much worse, and even became ashamed of her undemanding nature. Kathy had long ago realized that for some reason many people considered the struggle for survival an unworthy cause and would rather sit and cry than take up what was on offer. After all, Nancy had an intermediate moment in her life when she had not yet met her Kevin, and she was forced out of her job due to downsizing. So she suggested to Nancy that she talk to her boss about employment. Their veterinary clinic was in need of a second person at the front desk. Nancy smiled slyly and wondered, "How much will I be paid?" When she heard the salary, she grinned. "It won't be enough for me, you little thing. And the schedule is 2 after 2. It is not to see the light of day, but even a little money is better than nothing," objected Kathy, somewhat hurt by the neglect of her friend. "I will not work for such wages." Slowly emphasizing the intonation of the words, repeated Nancy. "Did I say something I didn't understand?" Even then, Kathy thought that their intimate friendship seemed to be coming to an end. Nancy, willingly or unwillingly, had just humiliated her. She had made it clear that Kathy was content with a pittance that she, Nancy, would not look at, even though she herself was now sitting without any money at all. Her words left an unpleasant residue, especially since it was clear that if Nancy had said it without thinking, she would have apologized. So she had just said what she wanted to say. And now she has re-emphasized that Kathy is happy with petty cash. "I don't get it. Why are you so eager to humiliate me?" she asked bluntly. "Is this how you elevate yourself in your own eyes? You wouldn't work for a small salary." "Fine, but it's your decision. You sit around and wait for a bigger one to be offered, but I choose to go and earn something so I don't starve to death waiting for better times." I'm not humiliating you." Nancy was confused. "I'm just saying that, well, I wouldn't work there. And I'm not allowed to express my opinion. I'd have got over it if you hadn't." Kathy replied bitterly, "And I'd have been much happier if you'd been supportive." She returned home that evening with a heavy heart. That was all. No, she has more of a friend, Nancy, because, yeah, is that how real friends act? I mean, what's the big deal? That friendship is long gone, and Kathy knew it all along, but she only realized it today. And when she did, she suddenly felt a tremendous sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Kathy was lucky. The pregnancy was easy. No toxicosis, no distractions, no swelling. Even on the contrary, the future mother felt a surge of strength and energy, which allowed her to work almost without fatigue and even carve out time to prepare for exams. She still had hopes of studying to be a veterinarian. Vanessa encouraged and supported her in every possible way. "Good for you for not giving up. Now you have a child to raise, and the profession, and such a demanded, you will be useful in any case. After all, animals, like people, will always need medical help. Even if in the city all stop having pets, you just get together and go to the village to work. Cows and goats also need doctors. So prepare properly and remember, you are doing this not only for yourself, but also for your baby. You're like my mom," Kathy said affectionately, and Vanessa smiled at her. "How could it be any other way? You're my mom, all of you. All of you who have been brought up here are like children. You raise everyone, you lead everyone. It's probably hard to understand, even if you don't encounter it." "I think I do," said Kathy. "After all, but many of us at least, and parents have never known their parents. We only had an orphanage, a tutor and you. And if someone looks at you as a mother, you become one." The headmistress didn't answer her anything, only stroked her head habitually. But Kathy had no time to notice the tears glistening in the woman's eyes. In the evening, she still ran around scrubbing the office floor. And although Kathy had never seen the owner, she received money on her card every Monday, and often with a larger amount, and such transfers were accompanied by a short note. Bonus. In general, cleaning this office was not a difficult job. It was only necessary to wipe the dust and wash the floors. Nothing in the chief's office needed to be cleaned. That's just the way he is, Vanessa explained. He doesn't like his things to be touched. He cleans his own. Well, that's the kind of thing a man has. Well, that's fine with him. It's less work for you. By the way, I told him you'd be out of work in a couple months. But what's his name, by the way? Kathy asked. I haven't seen him. I don't even know his name. His name is James, the superintendent replied. Well, he told me that he would wait for you for 3 months after the birth. If you want to keep working, you can come back. Did you ask him to do that? Kathy smiled. No way. The woman resented him. It's just that he's very happy with your work, so he's willing to support you. Do you think it's so easy to find a good employee? Oh, Kathy, there's always a shortage. Kathy decided to take this explanation for granted and didn't ask any more questions. And yes, Vanessa suddenly remembered. I almost forgot. He was away on business yesterday and will be back tomorrow. He asked me to clean his office during these 2 days, but for God's sake, don't move anything in there. I don't care if the whole desk is full of papers and chairs are lying around. Anyway, your job is to wipe the dust and mop the floors and nothing else. It was even scary to enter the chief's office, in case he accidentally touches some trifle, and then you'll get a harsh reprimand from the boss. But once I was in the Holy of Holies, I realized that there was nothing to worry about. The place was so perfectly tidy that I probably didn't need to clean it. But since you asked, Kathy pulled a dust rag from the pocket of her lab coat. James, it had to be said, was clearly the kind of person who liked to go over everything. For example, when hiring a new cleaner, he always asked about her clothing size so that he could buy the appropriate work coat and all the rags, cleaning gloves, detergents, brooms. All of this he kept on top of, and in time to purchase what was needed. Kathy decided to start with the desk. It was almost completely empty. A pen, a day planner, and a framed picture of a little girl. Probably a daughter, or maybe a granddaughter. Kathy quickly wiped the desk and was about to dust off the portrait. Only leaning closer to the photo did she suddenly freeze. She knew the little girl in the picture, and she couldn't help but know it, for a photograph of the little girl, seemingly at the same age, was kept in Kathy's own file. And underneath the photo was the caption, Kathy. In the picture, in both of those pictures, was her, Vanessa. Before Kathy knew it, she had grabbed her cell phone out of her pocket and dialed the number of the orphanage manager. Vanessa, can you hear me? Yes, Kathy. As always, the woman answered calmly. What's wrong? You told me to clean the chief's office. Yeah, did you break anything? No, said Kathy, but he has a picture of me as a kid on his desk. There was a confused silence. Kathy? Vanessa finally spoke up. And you, in one word, are you sure you're not imagining it? Could it be a similar girl? You said this man is a sponsor of our orphanage. Kathy interrupted her. Has he ever been to the orphanage himself? Could he have seen me there? The superintendent thought for a moment. No, I don't remember that. He always sent couriers, but he never visited the orphanage. I wanted to invite him to the Christmas party once, but he replied strangely that it was hard for him to see the children. I thought he must have had some terrible tragedy in his life. Kathy, why are we guessing at the end of the day? Let me call him right now and find out. Kathy looked at the pictures of herself as a child again, and forgetting that the superintendent couldn't see her, shook her head. No, I guess I shouldn't. I mean, just don't. He'll be back tomorrow. I'll come to work early and talk to him. Okay, Vanessa agreed. Here's the thing, Kathy. I'll just go with you, just to be on the safe side. Jane sat at the desk and looked at the picture of Kathy in the file or at the framed photo. Vanessa and Kathy sat silently across from him. Finally, he sighed and covered his face with his hands. "This is impossible," he said in a strangled voice. "It's completely impossible." "Kathy." "Oh my God, how could it be?" "Didn't Wendy say you drowned?" "Wendy?" Vanessa asked. "Who's that?" "My daughter's mother." The man said angrily, "If you can even call that bastard a mother. We were dating, even though I knew I didn't mean it. Wendy wanted a richer man, and I was just a lowlife. Anyway, she quickly realized that I wasn't worth much, and things were coming to an end. I was initially very attracted to her, and then I realized that no, the girl to other people's money greedy. I gave her a white car, as I remember now, and it was a medium-sized car. And when Wendy saw it, she curled her lips, and then she said, 'Why didn't you give me your money?' Oh, unite? That's when it all became clear to me. I wasn't worried that such a beautiful girl would leave me. But then she comes running one day and immediately screams that she's pregnant, the terms are missed, and the child is mine." "Yeah," James shrugged. "I didn't believe her, honestly. I thought she just wanted it. I don't know. Trying to get me to spend money again. Anyway, I sent her away. I thought I'd forget about it and forgot about it for a while. Didn't think about it for 2 years. I was in the Czech Republic on business. That's how the business for 2 years and dragged me down but never mind. And then I felt that no, I can't do that. My heart's not in the right place. I called her, and there were strangers on the phone. I went to her house and found out something. Allegedly, she gave birth to a baby girl, but then she rented out her apartment and lived in another neighborhood, in a rich neighborhood. And she had a man who seemed to be so respectable, but it's not hard to find out about the man. I still had some connections in town. The guy was really well paid and older than Wendy, a lot older. What do I care? I wanted to see my daughter. Once I caught up with my beautiful ex, I wanted to talk to her, and she tells me that my daughter went to the village to her grandmother and drowned in the river. She says, and she herself is crying. Then she took this picture out of her purse and gave it to me. Kathy was found in the woods. The shelter manager said with a sigh. A forest ranger found her. The girl was all alone. She had a note with her saying her name was Lisa, that she was healthy, and that she couldn't be cared for. Wendy, gritting his teeth, James. Snake, she's not a woman, she's a witch. Wendy? Kathy suddenly asked. So her name is Wendy? Well, yeah. She sort of divorced her husband afterwards, and then I don't know what afterwards. She has a veterinary clinic. Right. He slammed his open palm on the table. Let's go to her. Let's all go, James. Vanessa tried to stop him. Maybe you shouldn't get so hot. Chill out. Vanessa. He turned toward her, and the woman stepped back. There was so much suffering in his gaze. For so many years I thought my daughter, that she had drowned. And she'd been living in an orphanage all this time? She didn't know her father or her mother. I couldn't bear to look at the children, my heart sank. If it hadn't been for chance, she and I would never have found each other. And you're telling me to chill out. Kathy. He took his daughter by the hand. Daughter, you can't be nervous. You'd better stay at home. I'll deal with your mom myself, and then I'll come and tell you everything. And you and Vanessa. That's right. Vanessa cheered up. This is your business, and me and Kathy. Unnecessary nerves do not need. We'll stay together, have tea and cakes. Yes. James, Dad. Kathy looked pleadingly at her father. Maybe you shouldn't go either. Maybe it's over. The important thing is that everything's okay now. You'll be a grandfather soon. What's the point? The man hugged his daughter and kissed her affectionately on the top of her head. "I'll be back very soon, Kathy," he promised. Wendy, meanwhile, was almost perfectly happy. She felt 20 years younger, and that happened to her every time she got a new lover. This time it was a totally awesome character. A pure Viking. "If only I'd known my clinic had such handsome clients," she murmured, standing on tiptoe to reach the guy's lips. "You'd show up for work more often. So what's your kitty's name, Helva?" Robert smiled and touched Wendy's lips with his fingertips. "Yes, she's got a sweet tooth. I wonder how old she is. You can't tell from her face, but she must be putting more money into herself than he could ever dream of. Halva is my favorite treat. By the way, how about we take a trip to the birthplace of Oriental sweets together?" "Oh, come on. Where would I get that kind of money?" "Sha, honey. I'll pay for it myself, and you don't need to talk about it." Suddenly she stammered and looked fearfully at the door. Some voices were coming from behind it. "You can't go to Wendy's. I'm allowed." A man's voice bellowed back. At the same second, the door swung open with a bang. James looked disdainfully at the tall guy Wendy was clinging to. "Get out of here." He tossed it carelessly. "You can wait outside, because I have an important conversation with Wendy." Robert looked at Wendy confusedly and, noticing her slight nod, left the office. "What do you want, James?" the woman asked. She looked perfectly calm. "Is that allowed? You barge into my office, distract me from something important." "What's all the fuss about? You told me." He started, looking her straight in the eye. "You told me our daughter was dead." "That she drowned." "She was." Wendy agreed. "And you came just to remind me of that misfortune." "Then there was no need to try." "I've never forgotten the fact that—" "Ah, that you, a witch, left a 2-year-old girl alone in the woods, and you didn't care if she died or lived. That she was found by a forest ranger is unheard of. You filthy, disgusting monster, you could never forget that. Tell me, why did you do it? Why didn't you put her in an orphanage when she was such a nuisance to you? Why did you leave her to her fate?" Wendy still remained impenetrable. She pulled out a long, thin cigarette and took her time smoking it. "Because," she answered calmly, "that then there would have been some tails left, and I had to be clean before my fiancé. I have no idea what he would do if he found out I had a child. Maybe he would have chased me away, maybe not, but I couldn't take any chances. If I hadn't gotten married, where would I be now? I'd be living in some rundown house with leaky faucets. No money and no hope. Was I supposed to choose poverty? That's why I sent my child to her death. But she survived." Indifferently, Wendy shrugged. "And I never loved her anyway. She was ruining my life. What did I see with her but squeals and snot? I should have left her at the hospital right away, but for some reason I didn't realize it at the time, and then I regretted it every minute. And when I had a chance to make my life better, I had to turn it down. I wonder how many years you'll spend in prison, where you'll no doubt belong. How much will they give you if your dirty black secret gets out? Just think about it. A little girl, defenseless, alone in a dark forest, abandoned there by her own mother. What kind of punishment do you think a woman like that deserves? And what are the headlines everywhere? The owner of a thriving veterinary clinic tried to kill her own child in cold blood. Who would show up here after that? Who would trust a clinic run by a baby killer with their hamster? Get out of town, Wendy. Close that lousy office, take your mail and go far away, and don't come back here. You come into this town and you know what's waiting for you." And without another word, he turned abruptly and left the office. Robert immediately appeared in the doorway. "Well, what interesting news. I just found out. he said, looking meaningfully at the woman. "And I wonder what I'll do with them." Several months passed. Wendy sat on the sand and looked at the sea waves. Now all she had to do was sit there and watch. Robert, her sweet Viking, had turned out to be a notorious extortionist. He overheard a conversation under the door and then started demanding money for his silence. The sums got bigger and bigger, and then the moment came when there was nothing left to pay. Robert, quite contented and rich, immediately left in an unknown direction, and Wendy was left in her only dress and penniless. Now she came to the beach every day and just sat on the shore waiting for darkness. People left, but after them in the trash cans, there was a mountain of leftovers. When Wendy first dared to stick her hand in the pile of garbage, a well-fed rat jumped out of the container with a wild squeal. Wendy bounced away, but the rat rushed past. Going near the trash was scary. What if there were more of the less timid, rat-like kin sitting there? But I was hungry, unbearably hungry. And then Wendy noticed that at the top of the trash heap, there was a piece of bread tortilla that had not been eaten. Armed with a twig, she picked it up and pulled it to the ground. That night, Wendy fell asleep feeling satiated. And that feeling of satisfied hunger was so wonderful that she was no longer intimidated by the trash rats. Being able to get some food was far more important. But cold weather was ahead, and the woman knew that with the closing of the beach season, she would have to beg for a night shelter. There was still a way to get in. They said they didn't take everyone, favoring proven tenants who were absolutely certain not to cause trouble. Wendy filled her palms with seawater and tried to wash her face and iron her hair. She had to make a good impression on the administration of the lodge. It wouldn't be easy, of course, but she would try hard. The homeless shelter was in a good location. It was in an industrial zone, so gassy that it seemed as if you were not inhaling the air here, but eating it, swallowing piece after piece with difficulty. But, of course, in general, all these night shelters, they are in the Department of Social Services, and social services in all countries of the world hate to spend money. They're so pro-waste. Wendy, looking around, walked quickly toward the long line of sloppily dressed people apparently being admitted to the night shelter there. She quietly stood at the tail of the line and tried to listen to the quiet conversations. Maybe she could find out how to behave so that they would definitely take her in. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Wendy shuddered with surprise when she heard a familiar voice. "I'm talking to you, Auntie." And at the same second, someone's clinging hand clawed at the woman's dress. Did everyone see that? I've only gone around the corner, and she's already here. Insolent woman. Let me go, Ashole. Wendy was spinning around, hoping to get out of someone else's tight grip. "Let go," I said. She dodged and bit her tormentor's hand. "Ay, she bit me. Are you drunk or something? You're throwing yourself at people." Wendy, breathing hard, brushed her hair out of her face. "You could have politely told me I was taking your place." She looked up into the tall man's face. "Robert?" Yes, it was Robert. Ragged and dirty and smelled worse than a dumpster. See how we met. Crooked, he grinned. "All your money went to pay off your debts. I'm in a shelter too. I want to wait out the cold. Well, let's get in line, or someone else will come and beat us." They got in line one after another, and now they could only hope that they would be able to get into the shelter and find some kind of a roof over their heads, even if only for a short time. And no one in the world cared about them. No one, because they deserved it all. Karma? Boomerang? Yes, it was. That was the punishment for two lonely and lost souls.